In the 1950s, a scientist named Dr. Kurt Richter proved this when he gathered dozens of rats and dropped them into 30-inch deep glass cylinders filled with water. The first rat paddled on the surface for a short time, then swam to the bottom, where he looked for an escape hatch. It died within 2 minutes. Several others followed the same pattern. Some lasted as long as 15 minutes, but they all gave up. Richter was surprised because rats are damn good swimmers. Yet in his lab, they drowned without much of a fight. So he tweaked the test. After he placed the next batch in their jars, Richter watched them, and right before it looked like they were about to give up, he and his tech scooped up the rats, towed them off, and held them long enough for their hearts and respiratory rates to normalize. Long enough for them to register on a psychological scale that they had been saved. They did this a few times before Richter placed a group of them back into those evil cylinders again to see how long they would last on their own. This time, the rats didn't give up. They swam their natural asses off for an average of 60 hours without food or rest. One swam for 81 hours. In his report, Richter suggested that the first round of subjects gave up because they were hopeless, and that the second batch persisted for so long because they knew it was possible someone would come along and save their sorry ass. The popular analysis these days is that Richter's interventions flipped the switch in the rat brain, which illuminated the power of hope for us all to see. I love this experiment, but hope isn't what got those rats. How long does hope really last? It may have triggered something initially, but no creature is going to swim for their life for 60 hours straight without food, powered by hope alone. They need something a lot stronger to keep them breathing, kicking, and fighting. Richard had touched something in those rats that was damn near unbreakable. He may not have noticed them adapting to their life or death trial, but they had to have figured out more effective, efficient technique to preserve energy. With each passing minute, they became more and more resilient until they started to believe that they would survive. The confidence didn't fade as the hours piled up. It actually grew. They weren't hoping to be saved. They refused to die. The way I see it, belief is what turned ordinary lab rats into marine mammals. There are two levels to belief. There's the surface level, which our coaches, teachers, therapists, and parents love to preach. Believe in yourself, they all say, as if the thought alone can keep us afloat. When the odds are against us, the battle for our lives. But once exhausted, doubt and insecurity tend to penetrate and dissipate that flimsy brand of belief. Then there's a belief born in resilience. It comes from working your way through layers of pain, fatigue, and reason, and ignoring the ever-persistent temptation to quit until you strike a source of fuel you didn't even know existed. One that eliminates all doubt, makes you certain of your strength and the fact that you will prevail, as long as you keep moving forward. That is the level of belief that can defy the expectations of scientists and change everything. It's not an emotion to be shared or an intellectual concept. Nobody else can give it to you. It must be bubbled up from within. That's from Never Finished, David Goggins, a book that we're going to do a little bit of a deep dive into today. I'm going to leave out a stack of the book, a lot of the book, and just touch on some key points throughout it and try and string along a touch on some lessons that I think are very important and some lessons that really stuck with me from the book there. I want to just say that there's going to be I want to make this paramount that there's going to be a lot of the book that we will not be touching, a stack of it actually. So don't think that this is an audio book, anything but it. But realize that there's going to be a lot more to the book left, a stack more to the book left. If you want to go pick it up yourself and read it yourself, you can very well do that. And I thought change of scenery from the tree from the first one. Hopefully everybody liked the second episode that just went past. It was a great episode. If you haven't listened to it already, feel free to jump back into that and touch on it. If you're new here, my name's Zach Hampson. Welcome to the Zach Hampson podcast. Today we are doing a bit of a book dive into Never Finished, David Goggins' latest book. It's a great book, really, really good book. And I feel like there's a lot of lessons to be learnt from this book, particularly, subverting people's expectations, in particular those expectations of scientists that I know David loves to subvert on a regular basis, and has a lot to teach us about those, overcoming those ingrained, inbuilt belief systems that we've learned to adopt over our lives. And a lot of teachings about overcoming adversity, a lot of teachings about, powering through no matter the pain and sticking to your guns, sticking to your belief, and sticking to the task at hand and seeing it out to completion, no matter the cost. I think there's a lot to be learned from this book, and hopefully we can all learn a lot from it too. But I'm going to slowly sort of chip away through it, and hopefully we can all enjoy, and I'll stop periodically to sort of discuss and take a breather, essentially, on the book here. But back to the book. I was 24 years old when I realized I was broken inside. Something had gone numb inside my soul. And that numbness, that lack of deep feeling, dictated what my life had become. It's why I quit going after my goals, my biggest dreams, when everything's got hard. Quitting was just another detour. It never bothered me as much as because when you're numb, you can't process what's happening to you within you. I didn't know the power of the mind yet. And because of that, I ballooned into a fat ass and taken a job as a cockroach sniper in restaurants. I had my excuses, of course. My numbness was a survival mechanism. It had been beaten into me by my father. By the time I turned 7, I developed a POW mindset. Going numb was how I took my beatings and maintained some level of self-respect. Even after my mother and I escaped, I continued to be stalked by tragedy and failure. And numbness was how I coped with the fact that losing was all I ever knew. When you're born a loser, you go to survive, not thrive. You learn to lie, cheat, to do what it takes to fit in. You become a survivor. But it's a miserable existence, just like the cockroaches I was assigned to kill. You find yourself scurrying in from the shadows to claim that bare necessities while hiding your true self from the light at all costs. Born losers are the ultimate cockroaches. We do what we have to, and that attitude often enables some pretty severe character defects. I certainly had some. I was a quitter, a liar, a fat, lazy motherfucker, and I was deeply depressed. I could feel myself unraveling a little at a time, fed up and frustrated and bitter and angry. I couldn't take much more of my sorry-ass life. If I didn't change, and change soon, I knew I would die a loser, or worse, I might end up like my father, the hustler, who was one quick twitch away from violence. I was consumed by misery and groping for some mental foothold to keep me from giving up for good. The only thing I could come up with was to go back to the house on Paradise Road that still haunted me. I had to get to Buffalo, New York, and look my father in the eye, because when you're living in hell, the only way to find the way out is to confront the devil himself. I was hoping to find some answers that would help me change my life. That was what I told myself. As I crossed into Ohio and from Indiana and veered northeast, I hadn't seen my old man in 12 years. It had been my decision to stop seeing him. At that time, the court system allowed children to make those decisions once they turned 12. I made the choice mostly out of respect and loyalty for my mum. He stopped beating us after we left Buffalo, but the one thing that never went numb was how I felt about what that motherfucker did to me. Still, over the years I had questioned that decision and began to wonder if my memories of those stories told myself what's true. On the long drive, I didn't listen to music. All I heard were the competing voices in my head. The first voice accepted me as I was. It's not your fault, David. None of this is. You're doing the best you can with what you've been given. That was a voice I'd been listening to my entire life. It's not my fault was my favorite reframe. It explained and justified my lot in life and the dead-end path in front of me, and it played 24/7. However, for the first time, another voice chimed in. Or maybe it was the first time I stopped listening only to what I wanted to hear. It said, "Roger that. It ain't your fucking fault that you were dealt a bad hand, but it is your responsibility. How long will you allow your past to hold you back before you finally take control of your future?" Compared to the first, more nurturing voice in my head, this one was ice cold. I did my best to tune it out. The closer I got to Buffalo, the younger and more helpless I felt. When I was 150 miles away, I felt like I was 16 years old. As I pulled off the highway and wound through the Buffalo city streets, I felt like I was 8. The same age I was when we packed all our shit into garbage bags and walked out the door. Once I walked into the house, it was August 1983 all over again. The paint on the walls, the floors, and the appliances and the furniture, all of it was the same. While it looked a lot smaller out of date, but it was still the haunted house I remembered, filled with years of grisly memories and palpable dark energy. Whenever my father was warm and more affectionate than I remember. However, my father was warm and more affectionate than I remember. Trueness was always a charmer, and he acted genuinely happy to see me. As we caught up, I found myself laughing at his jokes, slightly confused by the man in front of me. After a while, he checked his watch, grabbed his coat. He held the front door open for his wife, Sue, and me as we headed for the car. "Well, where are we going?" I asked. "You remember the schedule," he said. "It's time to open up." A bit of a longer read there, but I just wanted to set a precedent for the foundation of the book here. If you haven't read the first book, Can't Hurt Me, it's a fantastic book. You really should check that out. It's a lot of it covers David's early life and escape from his father, Trueness Goggins, and what that was like, and the suffering that he, his mother, and his brother all endured for God knows how many years, and really set the foundation of just the weak, insecure, broken human being that he was. So obviously this is him returning at about 25 years old, back to see his dad, first time in 12 years or so, to sort of affirm for himself that it isn't his fault, and that this person is what created his life. This person is what did this to him. And it's funny, I think we all, in retrospect, right, we start to create this narrative inside of our brains to say, you know, I am this way because of this circumstance or this happening to me, or I am this way because of this. Instead of thinking, okay, like his secondary voice came through there, okay, that did happen. I am this way because of that. Roger that. But I don't have to be. Back to the book, just skipping over little chunks here to sort of get you into it. So he goes with his dad back to Skateland, which is the roller rink his dad used to, or owned, that he had to work as a kid. And a lot of the times he would work there day and night, school day or not, and just be there helping his father run the business till early hours of the morning. So back in here, he's sitting down after they went to the skate rink. He's sitting down with his dad at a Denny's. I think it's a type of restaurant. I'm Australian, so I wouldn't really know. Back to the book. I hadn't driven all the way from Indianapolis as some first step towards self-improvement. No, I was there looking for a free pass. I went to collect more evidence that all my failures and disappointments stem from the same root cause, my father, Trueness Goggins. I'd been hoping that everything I'd believed all those years was true, because if Trueness was indeed the devil in disguise, that gave me someone to blame, and I was looking for a cop-out. I needed trueness to be the flaw in my existence in order to claim the lifetime warranty on my get-out-of-jail-free card. All of us are dealt a circumstance in life we don't have any power to control. Sometimes those things are painful. Occasionally they are tragic or inhumane. While the accountability mirror, which I tagged with sticky notes filled with real talk and daily tasks and a few bigger goals, had helped me to get to a certain point, those fixes were surface level. I'd never attempted to dive down and solve the root cause of my problems. So, I crumbled whenever life asked me to dig deep and persevere in order to achieve something that could lead towards sustainable success. I spent my entire life in surface waters, hoping that my luck would change and everything I dreamt of would fall into place for me. That night, on my drive home to Indiana, I accepted the hard truth that hoping and wishing are like gambling on long shots. And if I wanted to be better, I had to start living every day with a sense of urgency, because that is the only way to turn the odds in your favor. Reality can be a motherfucker. When all your excuses are stripped away, you're exposed for exactly who and what you have become. But the truth can always be liberating. That night, I accepted the truth about myself. I finally swallowed reality. And now, I had my future. Anything was possible as long as I adopted a new mindset. I needed to become someone who refused to give in, who simply finds a way no matter what. I needed to become bulletproof, a living example of resilience. I realized that only I have the power to determine my future, and I had a choice to make. I could become a living. I could continue living in the haven of low expectations, where it was comfortable and safe to believe that my life was not my fault or my responsibility, and that my dreams were just that, fantasies that would never be, because time and opportunity would never be on my side. Or I could leave all that behind for a world of possibility, much more pain, unfathomably hard work, and zero guarantees of success. I could choose resilience. So even at a relatively young age there, around 25, he's gone back to see his father, and he's realized when he's seen his father again that this guy is just a man. He's just a man, and there's nothing inherently evil about him. Yes, his father did get handed a pretty hard lot in life in his younger years. He touches on that, but he's not the devil. Like he said, he's not the get out of jail free card. Excuse me. Not the get out of jail free card that he thought he was going to be, or wanted him to be, rather. And it's funny that we can all develop that narrative, like I was saying, and disguise the past with our thoughts and how we want it to be, to justify our present, to justify our future. But if we're able and capable to do what Goggins has just done here, at 25 years old, he's gone back to face the devil himself, or at least what he thought was. Going back to face the epitome of what he thought his problems were, or stemmed from. He discovered the truth. He realized that this isn't what has made me the way I am. It doesn't have to be. And he's realized that reality of becoming, as he said, becoming more is in the realm of possibilities for him. And I think that a lot of us could benefit from going back into our past, maybe as a person, Maybe it's a place. Just revisiting it and seeing it for what it is, and seeing the reality of it, and realizing that, hey, this doesn't need to shape me. This doesn't need to be who I am now. Back to the book. It's so easy to get lost in the fog of life. Tragedy hunts us all, and any event that causes suffering will linger longer than it should if you let it. Because our sad stories enable us to grade ourselves on a forgiving curve. They give us latitude and justification to stay lazy, weak-minded motherfuckers. And the longer it takes for us to process that pain, the harder it is to reclaim our lives. Sometimes weakness and laziness are rooted in hate and anger. And until we receive the confession, apology, or compensation we believe we are owed, we stay stuck in our shit, our self-righteous rebellion against our tormentors, or even against life itself. Some of us become entitled. We think our pain entitled us to feel sorry for ourselves, or that we're entitled to good fortune because we survived hell. Of course, feeling entitled doesn't make it so. Understand the clock is always ticking, and at some point, our golden hour will expire unless you take action. People who get lost in their past, the ones who bore their friends and family with the same tragic story over and over without showing a hint of progress, remind me of a skydiver who becomes too fixated on their tangled parachute. They know they have a backup ready to go, but burn so much time trying to fix the primary chute that they forget to track their altitude. And by the time they cut the first chute away and pull the second ripcord, it's too late. Part of the problem is that they have become terrified of pulling that second cord, because if it's also fucked up, then they will truly be helpless. That is a mental trap set by fear. We cannot afford to remain afraid of cutting away dead weight to save ourselves. That parachute analogy is a pretty powerful one. I think we all get wrapped up in trying to fix things, we get blindsided by just the problem, and that we just perpetuate this problem, and then, like you said, the golden hours go, and eventually your life is up, and you lived your whole life just fixated on this problem. That had you have had the courage to cut it off and pull the second chute, could have lived. Back to the book. It had been 3 years since I'd last seen and communicated with my brother. In the days after his eldest daughter was killed, we've always had an awkward relationship because our perspectives on our childhood are so different. When my dad was abusing us, my brother was always attempted to be a peacemaker, and that required him to make excuses for our father, no matter how vicious he was. He wanted everything to be kumbaya. When our dad came after our mother, Trueness Jr. made it a point to escape to his room, while I made sure to watch. I thought I saw things as they really were, and that made me a fighter. Trueness Jr. remembers things as he wished they were. I've never blamed him for it. We were all doing our best to survive, somehow. My mum couldn't protect either of us. She was getting her ass beat just as badly as we were. It was as if there were 4 different versions of the same reality show streaming from the house all at once. The dissonance was impossible not to feel and absorb. When I was 9 years old, my brother chose to leave us and our new life in Indiana to live with our father, and we were never close after that. However, he will always be my only brother. So, when I heard Kayla had been killed, I dropped everything to be with him. I will always care about him, and I admire him for surviving our fucked up childhood to become an amazing father and earn his PhD. Still, we share too much history and experience and experienced it too differently for it to be anything but awkward when we get together. So, when he told me what he had planned for after breakfast, I wasn't the least bit surprised. "We're driving to Buffalo," he said with a grin, "to show the kids around and pay our respects to the old man." I glanced at my mother, who'd been accompanying him and his family on their trip down memory lane. She couldn't look me in the eye. Although she and I don't always remember every little thing the same way, we know we survived hell. Like any good revisionist historian, Trueness Jr. is still trying to convince himself otherwise, which is why Buffalo remains his favorite city. He makes a trip as often as possible, and whenever he does, he visits the grave of our tormentor. For survivors of trauma, denial is a tantalizing numbing agent. It allows you to rewrite the past and sell yourself some fiction. In my brother's tale, Buffalo was a happy place, and our father was a pillar of the community. When we were kids, he forgave our father quicker than the priest in a confessional. And as an adult, his selective memory gives his childhood brighter sheen, which makes him feel less damaged. But whether he wants to acknowledge it or not, damage was done. If he experienced things the way my mom and I had, he wouldn't subject her to a stroll through his personal fantasy land, as if Buffalo weren't the torture chamber she'd escaped many years ago. Man, people that just going to grab a drink here. People that experience trauma, especially trauma on that level, on that scale, it's hard to face reality. No matter how much you might need to do so, to heal, to realize, to recognize what you went through. More likely than not, you're going to live your whole life never facing it. Like his brother, who in times of hardship, when things got crazy and hectic, when his father started beating his mother, started beating him, he just ran away. He ran to his room, hid. He didn't see it. Like Goggins said, he sat and watched it. That's what made him a fighter. And the differences in viewpoints, all of the same event, you know, you get that from any walk of life, really. Like, you know, guys that experience combat and have to run back through the scenario after the operation, and they all have different accounts of the same event. It might seem like, you know, people are lying or trying to make things up because some of it just doesn't line up, but we all experience life in such different ways that we can never really understand, I think. While we might do our best to empathize and sympathize with others around us, and we might do our best to understand to the best of our abilities what they went through, even though we may have experienced it ourselves, our viewpoints and the way that we take things in, the way that we choose not to take things in, just can flip it all upside down. Sorry. Back to the book. A lot of us are trapped in our own brains, shackled by long-gone memories, long-gone demons who might even be dead. We refuse to discuss or acknowledge what happened. So, when we overcome it all, we fail to recognize it or even feel it. So, skipping forward a bit, this is more present day Goggins. He's come a long way. This is more, you know, tail end of, you know, the last couple of years after his book and things like that. People get to know him. He's got a bit more notoriety now. If you're not familiar with Goggins, I really implore you to go read the first book, watch a couple of podcasts, learn about him, learn about his life story. When I started speaking in Fortune 500 companies and professional ball clubs for their living, I had to be willing to reveal my fucked up life story to successful people, including millionaires and billionaires who'd heard it all. This wasn't some simple recruiting trip to a high school where students were easily impressed and all my anxiety around public speaking resurfaced once again. I broke out the tape recorder. I spoke my fears and my trauma, which not that many people knew about, into the microphone and discovered a strange, unexpected alchemy. My fear and trauma were transformed into energy and confidence. Many people who write out their darkest moments in a journal or diary and hope to gain some leverage on whatever it is they survived or struggled to overcome. I've kept a journal for years, but there are levels to this shit. And a written archive is the entry level. Audio recordings are more interactive and accessible and have a more profound effect on the mind. If you were bullied, abused, or sexually assaulted and are willing to speak the unfiltered truth into the microphone and listen to it over and over after a period of time, it will become just another story. A powerful story, for sure, but the poison will be neutralized and the power will be yours. It is not a task to take lightly. If you've survived acute trauma, you don't want to think about what you were doing on the day it happened, what you heard, how you felt, or how your life capsized afterwards. Do it anyway. The more color and context you can add to the track, the sooner you will walk the streets with your headphones on and your head held high. When people see you coming, they might think you're listening to an Eminem jam. But no, it's your deepest trauma, the scene of your supposed destruction on repeat. With each subsequent listen, you will claim more and more power and gain enough transformational energy to change your life. Most people don't even want to think about their darkest shit, much less talk about it. They refuse to speculate in the harsh wilderness of their past because they are afraid of exposure. Believe me, there's gold in them. They're hills. I know because I was the black dude in the cowboy hat, hip deep in the icy stream, panning for nuggets. And if you find the courage to paint the picture of your worst nightmare in the spoken word, then listen to it until it soaks in and saturates your mind, until you can hear it without any emotional reaction or spill over. It will no longer make you cower or cry. It will make you strong. Strong enough to walk out on stage and tell the whole world what you did and how it didn't break you. It made you powerful. Recording yourself isn't just a reliable tool for neutralizing trauma. It can change the dynamic of almost any situation or mood. If used properly, it can also keep you honest. Lately, I've used this technique with the hate that comes to me online. Most people in my position don't read negative comments or emails. They have someone else screen and then erase them. I see hate as just another fuel source. I see the beauty and power in it, and I never let it go to waste. When the negative comments come in, and they always do, I capture them in a screenshot and speak them into my microphone. In 2021, I posted an image of my swollen left knee, which inspired a flood of negative comments. Some claimed to have seen my breakdown coming and counted it as a personal win. Others simply liked seeing me in pain. I'm tired of hearing you run your motherfucking mouth, one of them wrote. I hope I never see your black ass run again, wrote another. They were trying to assault my wounds. They wanted me to feel the sting, which I did, and hoped it would bring me down even further. It didn't. I loved those comments. I loved them so much I made a mixtape. I printed them all out, recorded myself saying each one, and I looped that bitch. Whenever I had a bad day, I listened to it. Sometimes I walk around the house savoring in full stereo. Most people only mind the positive shit. They want everything and everyone to be nice and hunky-dory. They get filled up on sweetness and recoil from dark, bitter pill of hate. But there's not nearly as much fuel in ass-kicking, kissing, attaboys, and accolades as there is in hate. Luckily, the world is filled with jealous, insecure haters. If you don't get negative comments on social media, find your fuel in the thoughtless comment of a friend or the doubt of a teacher or a coach. I'm sure it stings when you feel slighted, underestimated, criticized, or excluded. Just know that the heat you feel is free energy waiting to be burned. Don't crawl up in a corner worried about the people who disrespected you. Repackage that, what you're hearing and feeling, until it works for you. Man, that's a great technique. What Goggins has just unpacked there. In his first book, he talked about the accountability mirror, where he would have a mirror in his house, and he had post-it notes all over it with various different writings on it of encouragement or hatred or things to do and things to be accountable to and goals and things like that. And he would look in his mirror and read it aloud and go about his day that way. This here with the recording, man, it's hard not to laugh when you read that. Just how when he started to tell his story aloud to people and have it recorded and he'd hear it back to himself, he started to realize that it was losing its power over him and was actually providing him with a well of power, a spring of power within him, because he started to own that story and it became just another story. And just thinking about all the things in my own life, thinking about the things perhaps in your own life that you've gone through yourself, I'm certain that there's many stories that we could just hit record on and we just talk aloud and play on repeat that would, snuff out the power of those stories, at least the power that we say they have over us, and would allow us to reclaim that power for ourselves. A lot of people want to talk about recording affirmations, right? Like, I've done it. Many people do it. We talk about those affirmations of like, I am strong, I am powerful, I am capable, I am whatever else you want to put into that. But not a lot of us want to record the terrible shit like Goggins has suggested we do here. I think that's fantastic. I think there's something to be learned there. Back to the book real quick. I looked at each day as an opportunity to mine the negativity that had colonized my brain and became fascinated by the power of my mind and how it can work for us and against us. Often, it falls prey to the merry-go-round of emotions and situational conditions that cause confusion and sap us of focus, force, and fortitude, all of which have a natural tendency to ebb and flow like the tide. My early years made me very aware of this inertia, fragility we'd all have. But later on, I learned how to harness and channel all my mental horsepower to accomplish things I never thought possible for myself. And I did it by building what I now refer to as my mental lab. On February 6th, I received an email that twisted the knife. It came from Bob Babbitt. I've skipped over a little bit here. Maybe I'll sort of explain what happened with the mental lab. His mental lab was a place he would go to essentially find that negativity, to find that hatred, to find those terrible stories. Maybe it was the hate comments, but mostly it was his dark past and the person he used to be. He would go to there to reinvigorate himself, to bring out the Goggins, as he says, within himself, to empower himself. And skipping forward here to a more recent time. On February 6th, I received an email that twisted the knife. It came from Bob Babbitt, the man who introduced me to the Gren Welch, one of the greatest triathletes ever, at the Ironman World Championship in 2008. Welch has undergone 13 heart surgeries starting in his mid-30s, which forced him into an early retirement. In my panic state, I was sure this was some kind of bad omen. But Babbitt wrote to me with a simple question. He wanted to know if I'd consider running the Leadville Trail 100 later that summer to raise money for his charity, the Challenged Athletes Foundation, CAF. Since 1994, the CAF has raised $134 million and funded 35,000 athletes with physical challenges to get the coaching and support they need. It's a worthy cause to say the least, but it had been 5 years since my last 100 miler, when I DNF'd, did not finish, at Badwater. So I didn't reply right away. Instead, I stepped to the bathroom mirror and stared myself down. It wasn't Goggins staring back. It was David, and he was timid as fuck. I wondered if I'd even be able to physically complete the race, let alone compete at a high level I had in so many ultra races during my prime. Those thoughts were painful because they told me that although more than a month had passed since my trip to the ER, I was still a shell of my former self and felt fragile as hell. I hadn't been cleared to train hard because the doctors still didn't know what was wrong with me. As they put my heart through stress test after stress test, I remained low on motivation. After decades of hard charging, I was stuck on neutral, nowhere close to the mental beast I'd once been. When your entire life has been riddled with setbacks, landmines, trapdoors, some days it's damn near impossible to find motivation to keep getting after it. It's just too exhausting. And in that moment, I had no idea how much I had left in the tank. I searched my own eyes for answers, a commitment, the last glowing embers of confidence from what used to be a raging inner fire. If Badwater was the best-known ultra race on Earth, the Leadville Trail 100 ran as a close second. The race begins and ends outside the old Rocky Mountain mining town of Leadville, Colorado, which is set at just over 10,000 feet above sea level, and is rougher around the edges than the flashy ski resort and hippie towns nearby. The course is an out and back grind with several major climbs, combing for a total of over 15,000 vertical feet of elevation gain. I'd run Leadville once before, and I knew that fewer than half of all entrants are able to finish the race under 30-hour time limit. And those who were runners without unidentified heart problems and sickle cell trait, which makes carriers more prone to altitude sickness. And when you live at sea level, training for a race at altitude is much more difficult. Plus, with my speaking calendar packed to the limit, I knew I had months of travel, nothing but garbage training ahead of me. I'd be forced to run in strange cities, down avenues with tons of stoplights, packed sidewalks, or in residential areas barely new, on roads peppered with four-way stops. For Leadville, ideal training isn't just optimal, it is required if you expect to pull off an acceptable personal performance. Yeah, I skipped over a little bit there prior, but Goggins had a bit of a heart scare. Obviously, he's had a lot of heart problems most of his life, having a hole in his heart, plus a number of other terrible conditions that he has. But he had a bit of a heart scare there when he was training that put him in the ER real quick. His heartbeats became completely irregular and he couldn't get it to regulate properly, and so he went to the ER. They gave him some medication, helped him out, tried to steady that out, and so it did steady out, but he still at this time doesn't really know what caused that. Doesn't really know if it'll happen again. So and on top of that, he hasn't done a 100-miler for 5 years. And he says that he became a part-time savage. And I remember when he first said that on a podcast, he became a part-time savage. And it just made me reflect on myself, on my own life, what I could be doing, what I should be doing. You know, I definitely ramp things up really hard in work, in relationship with my daughter, with my fiance, with, you know, exercise and working out and things like that. But, you know, they are periods, right? I think, you know, we all fall prey to becoming part-time savages. And most of us don't even hit the savage level, let alone, you know, just doing it part-time, right? Myself included in that. I think a lot of us, let alone becoming a part-timer at anything, we don't even make it to the savage level. So to hear Goggins himself, the quote-unquote baddest motherfucker on earth, say that he became a part-time savage, it just makes me think, shit, if somebody that seems so impenetrable to laziness, although he came from being the most lazy person, being the most broken person, into what he is now, can still fall back into those old habits, having pushed as hard as he has and worked as hard as he has and become what he has, he can still fall back to that. Man, it speaks to me that this is not a fix. This is not a solution. Although all of us spend our entire lives looking for a fix, looking for a solution. We go to workshops, we go to seminars, we read books. We look for that solution, that pill to fix us. And if David fucking Goggins, dude that's overcome so much in his fucking life, can still fall back into old habits, into being a part-time savage, into fear, then I think that proves to all of us that there is no such thing as a cure. There is no such thing as a fix. And that's comforting in a weird way, to know that there isn't a fix, that people don't just flip a switch and they become everything that they hope to become in life, but rather it's a day-by-day effort of small decisions and small actions that accumulate over time. Back to the book. So David's sort of grappling with himself about becoming this part-time savage. He's sort of, you know, looking at his cookie jar, he's looking at his mental lab, and he's looking at how soft he's becoming, or has become, and how flat he feels, and especially, you know, all the things surrounding his life and the circumstances at that point in time. And he's still thinking about this Leadville race, whether or not he'll do it or not. He hasn't said so yet. So, back to the book. For 8 weeks, I lived in a self-imposed purgatory. Depending on the minute, hour, or day, I told myself I was in and then enamored all the valid reasons why it was best not to enter the race. Then, in April, after my cardiologist cleared me to train harder, I dipped my toe into the Leadville waters like the part-time savage I'd become. I didn't commit to Bob, but I did bump up my training to a point. Instead of putting together a series of 100-miler weeks, I was content to clock in with 50s, but on those runs, my focus was way the fuck off. I hardly remembered anything I felt or saw out on the road. If I wanted to crush Leadville and find myself again, I needed to demand more from myself on a daily basis. I had to sharpen my focus. I told Kish, David's wife, that if I didn't want her to book any more speaking engagements. I have never been about the business aspects of this shit anyway. And while I appreciated all the respect and support from the people and organizations I engaged with, I knew it was having a corrosive effect on my mindset. The ego is an amazing force. The more I heard about my own success and the more tempting it became to coast as if I'd finally arrived, even though I know that the journey never ends and that there is always more work to do. When life stops kicking you in the teeth and serves you a big bowl of praise and pudding instead, it's easy to feel that you are the motherfucking man, especially if that level of respect was hard-earned. But praise, whether it comes from your supervisors, your family, or anyone else, has a downside. It can soothe the inner savage and keep you from feeling the need to grind. On June 4th, I emailed Babbitt and told him that if there was still space, I was willing to race across the sky for CAF. Part-time savage that I was, I emailed him 3 days after the deadline, proof that Goggins was still MIA, and David was the one making all the moves. But Babbitt managed to get me in, and a week later, Kish and I landed in Avalon, New Jersey, for several weeks of training. So, David still hasn't found his Goggins, his alter ego, as he likes to call it, the side of him that can dig deep and persevere through anything. He still hasn't been able to find that side of him. And he still lives as a part-time savage. And so this race is really intimidating for him. He's not able to reconnect yet with that side of him that is able to accomplish all these hard-earned victories that he has accomplished in his life. But nevertheless, he still commits. Back to the book. The weeks progressed and the conditions deteriorated. And that's when I began to enjoy myself. Some days I left the house without breakfast. And after barely eating dinner the night before, I wanted to run my daily 20 bonked because I knew a moment like that was bound to come. In the Rocky Mountains, I needed to train the body to churn out miles even after the fuel tank was drained and send a message to myself that I was capable of finding energy where there was none. One afternoon, I hit a wall at mile 15. My pace plummeted from 7 minutes per mile to the mid-9s. I was out of water, of course. But as miserable as it was, I found myself enjoying being dizzy, dehydrated, and calorie-starved. I relished in the suffering because it let me know that I still had it in me to push myself that hard. I scorched the final mile in 7 minutes flat. One of the hottest days of the year was in mid-July, when the mercury climbed above 100 degrees and the humidity was over 80%, 100 degrees Fahrenheit, not Celsius for all my Australian people out here. The heat index was off the charts and the air quality was shit too. The county issued a warning advising residents to remain indoors. In Gogglish, that meant it was the perfect day for a 22-mile run. Avalon was always bumping during that month of July when the bike lane is heavily trafficked and the pancake houses and bakeries have long lines of eager customers. That day, the streets were silent. For 10 miles, I didn't see anybody at all. In the 11th mile, a car crept past, slowly, and I could tell the driver recognized me. Sure enough, he flipped a U-turn and came rolling right up beside me. "David Goggins! Man, I knew that was you. glanced over at him. He looked reasonably fit and athletic. He was also baffled, and maybe even a little concerned as he watched me pound the pavement. "Dude, why are you even out here on a day like this?" I shrugged and shook my head. "Because you're not." I didn't think much of the flippant comment at first, but as I ran ahead, I savored it. I picked the worst day of the summer for the longest run of the week. Why? Because nobody else would even consider doing something like that. And that gave me a chance to prove myself, to be uncommon amongst the uncommon, once again. I wasn't exactly the hard ass from SEAL training, but I was closer than I'd been in years. I ran on a state of mind that hadn't experienced since strolling gym in Tennessee road race I won in 2016. I'd attacked that course with a calm focus and ran those 41.2 miles like it was a marathon at 7:07 per mile pace. I tracked down the race leader with 8 miles to go and held on to finish in under 5 hours and win by 3 minutes in the brutal heat of Avalon. I discovered that same state of mind and body and realized that in the brutal heat of Avalon, I discovered that same state of mind and body and realized that the man I thought I'd buried with too much comfort and success was still inside me, waiting to be unleashed. The world needs doctors, lawyers, and teachers, but also needs savages to prove that we're all capable of so much more. After 10 weeks of hard charging and 8 weeks of heat training, I was well on my way to rediscovering something I thought I'd lost. So, he's starting to find his inner Goggin once again. Sorry if I keep looking down at the ground, but we've got a shit ton of funnel webs, shit ton of big ants all around here, so got to be a bit vigilant while I take in the background and sit here. But yeah, Goggins is hitting the pavement hard, and I loved what he said there, "Because you're not." That's just, it's just one of those lines that you always dream that you could say yourself, right? But because we're not the baddest motherfucker on earth, many of us don't get that chance, right? And it's funny how he, to rediscover that side of himself, he had to put himself back into the fury of training again and had to say no to the speaking engagements that he's so used to and where he makes his living from now and fills out all of his calendar for most of the year. He had to rediscover and reconnect to that side of himself that he had lost. Back to the book. I was the guy who savored scorching temperatures. I'm not beating any world-class runner based on speed alone, but if it's a hot sufferfest, I have a chance. That's how I'd always been. Yet there'd been a sudden glitch in my operating system, and that mentality was filed, not found. But when race day came around, I was nowhere near Badwater Basin, the start line of the race. "Do you want me to call the guys?" Kish asked. I'd lined up 2 friends to crew the race. They were hours away from boarding their flights. Should I cancel their trips and tell them Leadville is off? Kish was right. That, given how I felt physically, 100 unnecessary miles at altitude seemed like the very definition of a very bad idea. And now she was telling me I was 1 phone call away from salvation. I wouldn't even have to make it myself. However, while my body was definitely fucked up, my mind was starting to harden up. This was not motherfucking 2016. So what if my legs weren't churning? Kish would hang... Apologies. This was not motherfucking 2016. So what if my legs weren't churning? Kish could hang with me on every run, or Ajax repeatedly kicked my ass. Altitude wasn't my problem. The only issue I could see was that I hadn't run a 100-mile race in 5 years, and I'd forgotten that feeling worn out before a race was status quo for me. I'd never been tapered before any of my events back in the day, which meant I never once showed up to a starting line with loose and rested legs. Whether I came in first, second, third, or last made no difference to me back then. I'd once walked 100-milers to finish Badwater, and if I had to, I'd do it again in Leadville. In other words, everything was in its rightful place. Even with my physical fitness faltering, my mind was gaining strength in every hour spent on the trails. I was starting to think like a savage again, and banking knowledge that I had successfully climbed steep terrain at altitude despite how I felt, so that I could lean on the experience to keep me feeling confident even when I was comfortable and undernourished, sleep deprived and dehydrated, on the steepest, hardest climbs of Leadville course. Unprepared mind prefers a proper taper and rested legs. It prays for a clear 60-degree race day, morning and tailwind that flows in both directions, and maybe a little drizzle every third mile, but only for a few seconds to cool off, not enough to make the trail muddy or slick. A prepared mind craves the worst conditions because it knows that pressure brings out the best and exposes almost everyone else. It doesn't care if your legs are working right, if the temperature is perfect, if there is one hellish hill or an entire mountain range waiting to crush you. When there are freezing river crossings, it doesn't concern itself with your wet feet. It doesn't pay any attention to distance, and it sure as fuck doesn't give a damn how long it takes to get there. The prepared mind is a magnificent thing, and mine was just about ready. My nutrition plan was dialed in, and my self-talk and visualization were on point. And you know what guaranteed me? Jack fucking shit. So much had changed since the last race. These events used to be my time away from humanity. It was the place I went to enter an animal state of body and mind, and it was easy to disappear because not many people were into the sport. Back in the early 2000s, there were only about 20 or so 100-mile events the entire calendar year, raced by hardcore crew of motherfuckers hungry for some suffering. You could rock up on the day of the race and gain entry. Now there were more than 200 100-mile races each year in the United States alone. Ultra running had gone mainstream during my absence, and the start line in Leadville was surreal. The field was packed with over 800 happy, chatty athletes taking selfies and streaming live. The energy was palpable. As we shook loose preparing to tackle an out and back course, most of it on the Colorado Trail, which ranges between 9,200 feet and 12,600 feet in elevation, most of us weren't trying to win. Typically, less than half the field completes the course within the designated 30-hour time limit. I'd learned long ago that no matter what type of event or challenge I engaged in, the only competition that ever matters is me against me. A lot of people will take this as yet another invitation to coast. Please don't. Though I hadn't entered a 100-mile race in years, I planted a carrot, something to chase, in the back of my mind to keep me focused, dialed in. Life is not pass, fail. It is about impact and effort. Carrots can help maximize both and almost always produce a better result. If I was going to do Leadville, I was going to do the motherfucking Leadville. No matter how fucked up I felt. Physically, I didn't come all the way out here just to see if I could finish at 30 hours. My goal was to finish under 24. So, David's getting back there. He's planted that carrot in his mind that he wants to finish it under 24 hours, as opposed to the set time of 30 hours that they allow for completion of the race. But that's crazy. He was at the start line there, and there was over 800 happy, chatty athletes taking selfies and streaming live. That's just nuts. I have never done a marathon myself, to be quite honest. I don't run. I hike a lot, and I'm capable of hiking for very, very, very far stretches and long periods of time, but I really can't run that well. Partly because I've just never trained for it. Another part because I don't want to. I will admit that. Another part because I find it extremely hard. And another part is, might be due to a lot of physicality, but I'm not using that excuse. I'm just saying I am 6'4" and I weigh about 120, 130 kilos. So I find it very hard to maintain a long pace. But I'm not saying that's an excuse, but to have 800 people there at the starting line, that's just nuts. That's insane to me. I can only just imagine what that would look like. That's a lot of fucking people there to just be in this one race. In Goggins' first book, he talks about all the 100-mile races that he used to do and compete in the early 2000s, where hardly anybody would show up. You might have 100 people there, maybe, if that. And now having it grown all this way up to where you got almost damn near 1,000 people at the starting line, that's just nuts. Wow. I have been to an Ironman before. My brother's competed in an Ironman before. He did really, really well. There were quite a lot of people there, but I don't think anywhere near that many people. That's nuts. Sorry that I'm spending so much time on that thought, but that's crazy. But to see Goggins sort of see that and start to get into this zone, even though it's not how he used to remember it or how he used to experience it, being this sort of animalistic, away from everybody type of thing, and now it being just jammed full of people, he's still able to sort of find that inner beast, or is at least starting to feel it. Back to the book. The Leadville Trail 100 has a bunch of false summits. The most infamous one is on Hope Pass at 12,600 feet above sea level. The climb begins at around a 40-mile mark, and it's the last major pass before the turnaround at Winfield. By then, I'd found rhythm, and my legs were still in decent shape, despite having put in more miles that day than I had in 3 years. As the single-track trail sneaked steadily up toward the tree line, I speed hiked by pressing my hands on my knees for leverage. While the vast majority of the other runners around me used trekking poles, I was an old-school ultra guy. To me, those poles looked like crutches. I was content going hands on knees all the way to the top. Nevertheless, poles were allowed. And they do make you faster. I could tell, because I kept losing ground as the trail wound higher and higher. After a few miles, the trail poked out above the tree line and leveled out again in the tundra. It looked and felt like we'd reached the top. I saw several runners get happy, pleased enough to pick up their pace. But as soon as we rounded the next bend and saw how much there was still left to climb, their heads dropped and their shoulders slumped, while I smiled to myself and kept grinding. Bent at the waist. Apologies, I've lost my spot there. Bent at the waist, my palms pressed onto my knees, driving more power into the balls of my feet as they struck the ground, which allowed me to chop and climb down to size, one step at a time. People who've spent time on high country trails know the heartbreak of false summit. When all you want is for the incline to stop kicking your ass, it tricks you into thinking you've made it, only to revel that you aren't even close. But you don't have to be a trail rat to know the feeling of life. There are plenty of false summits. Maybe you think you've rocked an assignment at work or school, only to have your teacher or supervisor rip it to pieces, or tell you to start over again. False summits can come in the gym, when you're doing a hard circuit workout and think you've hit the last set, only to hear from your coach or trainer, or from a quick glance at your own notes, that you have to go back through an entire circuit one last time. We all take a punch like that every once in a while, but those who tend to crane their necks looking for the crest of the mountain as they beg for their suffering to end are the ones who get smashed the most. We have to learn to stop looking for a sign the hard time will end when the distance is unknown. It's even more critical that you stay locked in so that unknown factor doesn't steal your focus. The end will come when it comes, and anticipating it will only distract you from completing the task in front of you to the best of your ability. Remember the struggle is the whole journey. That's why you're out there. It's why you signed up for this race, or that class, or took a damn job. There is a great beauty when you're involved in something that is so hard most people want it to end. When Hell Week ended, most of the guys who survived cheered, wept, tears of joy, high-fived or hugged one another. I got the Hell Week blues because I'd been immersed in the beauty of grinding through the personal growth that came with it. We can make an obstacle as big or as small as we like it. It's all in the way we frame it. Going into Leadville, I expected one long, hard motherfucking day. But how many inconsequential days had I lived by then? Why not spend one single day doing something I'll be proud of for the rest of my life? Like Elmo said at London Swain in his apartment before wrestling match of his life in the movie Vision Quest, it ain't the 6 minutes, it's what happens in that 6 minutes. When we're climbing a mountain or involved in any other difficult task, the only way to free yourself from the struggle is to finish it. So why bitch about it when it gets hard? Why hope it will end soon when you know it will end eventually? When you complain and your mind starts groping for the eject button, you are not bringing your best self to the task, which means you are actually prolonging pain. I was just off Leadville PR pace of 22 hours and 15 minutes, which put me on top 40 in the entire field. Not that I knew it at the time. I didn't wear a fitness watch. I wore a $10 special from Walmart that I bought the day before because I didn't want knowledge of the pace clouding my mindset. I was focused on one thing, the task at hand. After a short rest to eat and hydrate, it was time to retrace my steps and climb up Hope Pass from the backside. This time with my pacer, my old friend TJ. My old friend TJ had stuffed his pack with extra food, water, gear he thought I might need, and his legs were fresh. His presence pushed me up the ascent at a strong pace, and although it had been some time since I'd run trails consistently, I had become a good technical trail runner over the years. That muscle memory clicked back in, which enabled me to attack the descent, fly down the other side. The final major climb of the race loomed at mile 75. It's called Powerline, and that one has a false summit too. TJ had a pair of trekking poles with him, and he kept offering them to me. He had been annoyed watching people with poles pass us on the backside of Hope Pass while I was still hiking on hands and knees. We caught most of them on the way down on the flats, only to give up again on the power line. "Come on, man, just try the poles for a mile or two," he said. "See if you like them." "Fuck that," I snapped, as two more people passed us up. In the old days, that was cheating. I was cooked by then. For the first time all day, the accumulated miles and my pace were starting to wear on me. He could see it. "I'm telling you, Goggins." I looked over at TJ as he held them out like he knew I was pressing a weapon of last resort to the grumpy samurai, still clinging to the old ways. I snatched them. Irritated that I was abandoning the hard-ass old ultra ethic. Then again, the sport had evolved, and that was the opportunity for me to evolve with it. As he pressed those poles, as he promised, those poles took so much pressure off my legs they suddenly felt fresh, and I charged up that steep ass mountain. I was moving better and faster than I had several hours, and past seasoned ultra runners Apologies. I was moving better and faster than I had in several hours. I passed seasoned ultra runners like so many. My confidence was swelled and my sense was heightened. I moved up the field and felt so powerful in the flow that something shook loose in my memory, tumbled in front of my mind. That's what makes events like Leadville so deep and poetic. 100-mile grind at altitude while wringing everything out of you. And as I flew up Powerline, I saw the scared kid who used to look for exits because he was blind to his own possibilities. Apologies for stuttering. But this is my first attempt to do a book dive for a podcast. I enjoy these types of book dives with Jocko Willink and things like that. And I always come away from them learning so much more and experiencing so much more from books that I may never have heard of or read in my life or been able to hear about ever in my life. So I've always valued those types of podcasts. So apologies that I'm a bit rough around the edges when reading the books to you. I'm doing my best. I promise you that. I'm trying hard. But just know that, it's not you, it's me. But damn, the race has changed. The sport has changed since last time Goggins had competed. And he's pressing hard. He's pressing real hard to maintain his pace that he wants to keep on so that he can make it within 25 hours or 24 hours like he said he wanted to do. So far so good, but it's starting to wear on him. He's got so many injuries and, problems with his knees, his ankles, his feet, his heart, his lungs, everything. Plus, on top of all of that, the altitude is starting to really get to him, I think. It's starting to really mess with him. And I think that's something that we're going to see start to pop up. So, Goggins is now reflecting a little bit on his life as he runs these ultra marathons, and he has said that running these ultras allows him to be introspective of his life, of himself, and the circumstances of his upbringing, the circumstances of who he is, what he's done in his life, and he often finds himself reflecting on a lot of that. And I think that's where he gets a lot of his powerful thoughts and a lot of his powerful wisdom from, his hard-earned wisdom that he gets from running these terribly hard races. And this is just him reflecting on some of his upbringing while he's running this 100-miler. Due to my hard upbringing, I was more aware of how the world worked with most fifth graders than most fifth graders. And I couldn't help but wonder how the fuck I was going to get through life if I couldn't get a word out. So Goggins struggles to read, he struggles to speak, he's got a bad stutter, things like that. Just as an aside. What became of people like that? The thought terrified me. The world was closing in because my stuttering ruled me. It was all I could see, hear, and feel. There was no available space in my positive thought to take root in my brain, so I gravitated towards shortcuts and hunted emergency exits. For many people, the hunting begins the minute they wake up. Maybe they are fat or disabled, feel ugly or failing, and overwhelmed at school or work. It consumes them. Their obsession with their own imperfections and faults suffocates self-respect and submarines progress. And from the time they get out of bed until they are able to crawl back into it at night, the only thing on their agenda is avoiding exposure and surviving another day in hell. When that's how you feel about yourself, it's impossible to see possibilities or seize opportunities. We all have the ability to be extraordinary, but most of us, especially the haunted ones, tap out of the crucible and never experience what it's like to get on the other side of hell. My metamorphosis was as brutal as a process that unfolded over the decades. But eventually, I became the polar opposite of the kid, frozen in the hot stage lights and gazing at his teacher, who only wanted to teach him to read. I became a full-time savage who walked a distant, narrow path with cliffs rising on both sides, no aid stations or rest areas, and no turnouts or exits of any kind. Whatever popped up in front of me had to be dealt with head on, because the full-time savage sees everything in life as an opportunity to learn, adapt, and evolve. However, when Babbitt's message found me, at first I looked for an exit. Then I pulled my head out of my ass and found a way. Now, over 75 miles into one of the most difficult races on earth, I felt unnaturally strong, which is exactly why those images from fifth grade play continue to run on loop in my mind's eye. Your strongest moments will often make you think of your weakest. I was pushing so hard, my perspective ran deep, and I felt for that kid, knowing he allowed situations to dominate him for way too long. But I was proud of him too, for overcoming all of that. It was truly amazing what that little motherfucker accomplished. Like I said, Goggins often finds himself being self-reflective, introspective, and philosophical in these races. And oftentimes he finds his greatest lessons in these races. And I think that a lot of us never find the introspectiveness and the healing and the work and the thoughts and the ideas and the wisdom that we need to find, because we do not put ourselves into the crosshairs, because we don't put ourselves into the fire, because we don't burn away weakness. We never find what we need to find to create the person that we long to be, that we should be. And I think that Goggins was lucky enough that he was able to work out at least at an early-ish stage in his life. You know, most people wouldn't say like 25, and late 20s would be early, right? You know, but it's very, very early in your life. And so he's fortunate to find that out. Maybe not intentionally, but we can all learn from his wisdom in the fact of knowing that now, that we have the opportunity to, if we want to better ourselves, we want to change ourselves, we too can throw ourselves into the fire. And that's something I myself long to do more of, am trying to do more of, and will do more of in the coming year. And hopefully I can put some videos out regards to that. Back to the book. During my time in the aid station, I absorbed the scene. Some runners staggered in, others laughed and joked with their crews while they ate and rehydrated. All of us were almost through a barbaric rite of passage. But after it was all over, how many of us use it as an opportunity to ask deeper questions of their body and mind and to demand more of themselves? Leadville 2019 was populated with plenty of part-time savages. People who dialed up their training for 6 or 7 months, complete a race of a lifetime, and then sit back and do nothing else like it for years. As I headed out to run one last leg, I no longer wondered if I'd finished. The question now became, where would that finish line lead me? For the next 2 miles where the trail pitched toward the peaks, TJ and I, for the next 2 miles when the trail pitched toward the peaks, TJ and I walked. When it flattened out, we ran. I was tired, but TJ was deep in the hurt locker, When the flat section stretched out into some distance, a sizable gap opened up between us. I'm not a chatty runner, so I thought he was giving me more space. But after I started walking again, he caught me, and his breath sounded heavy and jagged. When we hit the last 2 miles of Turquoise Lake, one of the last long flat sections of the race, I could not hang. He could not hang. The trail wrapped around the Alpine Lake, which was surrounded by craggy peaks until it intersected with a steep jeep trail. A volunteer was stationed there in a van to guide the exhausted runners in the proper direction. I was out of food and water, but that wasn't my concern. When I asked the volunteer if he had anything to spare, the guy landed me one unwrapped Pop-Tart. I thanked him and waited, holding that damn thing for 10 minutes, then 15. A few runners passed me, but there was no sign of TJ. So I took off running, away from the finish line. After a half mile, I saw TJ walking my way. To say he was surprised to see me would be an understatement. And when I handed him that frosted fucking snack, it sent him into a tailspin. As he ate, he lamented that he came to Colorado to support me and now was turning the tables to help me get him to the finish line. He knew I'd abandoned my shot at a PR, saw me getting reeled in over and over, and felt like dead weight. A few minutes later, sometime around 2 a.m, we reached the van again and began navigating a steep decline beneath a starry sky. A couple of headlamps came bobbing up from behind, getting closer and closer. It was another runner and his pacer. The runner slowed down and he caught us. When he recognized me, he stopped and smiled. He thought he was just another friendly dude, happy to be nearing the finish line. But he had something else on his mind. "My son told me you were out here," he said. "He actually challenged me to catch you. And I guess I caught you." "I guess you did," I said. He nodded, pleased with himself, and ran off. "I can't believe that fucking guy." TJ shook his head as we watched him get swallowed by the night. "He didn't fucking catch you." "Forget about him," I said. It bothered me too, but I didn't want TJ to see that. It would only make him feel worse. "If it weren't for me, he would never seen you." TJ's eyes flashed with his first signs of life I'd seen in miles. He was more annoyed than I was. "He didn't catch you. He caught your pacer." He was pissed. He was so pissed, in fact, that he started to run for a stretch, then staggered and walked to catch his breath. That sequence played out a few times. It was pretty clear he couldn't maintain a workable pace, but that wasn't the point. TJ was sending me a message. He knew I still had plenty in the tank, and that crossing the finish line with any moment of unburned fuel is a cardinal sin. With his hands on his knees, he turned to me and said, "What the fuck are you still doing here? You need to go hunt that bitch down." That was music to my ears. We shared an evil smile, and I took the fuck off. When I made the last run on the race course, I had a gradual 3-mile incline to hammer to reach the finish. To reach the finish. All but the elite of the elite walked the final stretch, which meant I drained my tank. I would pass some runners. I had taken a snapshot of that smug motherfucker in my mind's eye, and I wanted to catch his ass. I used to take snapshots like that all the time when I was a full-time savage. If you said something smart to me, I'd talk shit right back to you and use your disrespect as ammunition to propel me into whatever the fuck task or race or workout I had lined up next. And there was always something. We all have that ferocity, that dog inside us. Its natural response to provocation, a close cousin to the survival instinct. But most of us keep it chained up and locked away behind closed doors, because the savage side of ourselves doesn't mix well with the civilized world. It's obsessive, it's always hungry, always looking for scraps, nourishment, and finds them in competition, failure, and disrespect. I used to open that door on a regular basis, but as my life changed, I locked that beast away, like almost everybody else, and started letting those slights go. Any shade tossed in my direction was shed quicker than water down a duck's back. I'd matured and decided to live a more balanced life. That wasn't necessarily a bad thing, but it wasn't all good either. I wasn't hungry anymore. I passed over a lot of juicy scraps for years, but that smug motherfucker, casual comment, did not slide down my back. The dog was hungry again. And on the agonizing final stretch, I realized how much I missed that feeling of being obsessed. The buzz I got from draining the tank dry, I deprived myself of it for way too long. If you want to maximize minimal potential and become great in any field, you must embrace the savage side and become imbalanced, at least for a period of time. You'll need to funnel every minute of every single day into the pursuit of that degree, that starting spot, that job, that edge. Your mind must never leave the cockpit. Sleep at the library or the office. Hoop long past sundown and fall asleep watching film of your next opponent. There are no days off. There is no downtime. When you're obsessed with being great, that is what it takes to be the baddest motherfucker ever at what you do. Know that your dedication will be misunderstood. Some relationships may break down. The savage is not socialized beast. And an imbalanced lifestyle often appears selfish from the outside. But the reason I've been able to help so many people with my life story is precisely because I embraced being that imbalanced while I pursued the impossible dream of becoming the hardest motherfucker ever. That's the mythical title, but it's become my compass bearing my North Star. And there it was again, flickering in the Colorado sky, brighter than all other galaxies. It guided me up that hill and into another flowing rhythm as I passed 5 more runners. Each headlamp I collected yielded more energy to burn. And with 1.5 miles to go in that race, I reeled in my last one. It was that smug dude. I didn't approach on a far left side of the gravel road. I rushed right up his shoulder. I didn't touch him, but I was a hair's width from that motherfucker because I didn't want him to be confused or disorientated in the darkness of night. I wanted him to know exactly who had run him down. He had no clue of what he'd found a few miles back, minding my own business. I was helping my pacer. He couldn't have known how much energy I'd left, but when you don't know who it is you're talking to, the wise move is to lead with respect or say nothing at all. Instead, he ran his mouth, dropped some scraps, and fed the hungry dog inside of me. Oh, but he had nothing to say when I blew past him, and neither did I. I didn't even give him the satisfaction of looking over, but I heard him huffing and puffing, and when he lowered his head in shame, I was reminded of why you should always beware spitting in the wind. I'd run a hell of a race and finish at 35th place at 22 hours and 54 minutes and 40 minutes slower than 2007, but still a damn good time considering there had been 12 long years and 2 heart surgeries between starts. Kish had never seen me finish a 100-miler. She was elated, and I crossed the line and expected some big hallmark moment, but I wasn't in the mood to celebrate. Like Colonel Trautman said about Rambo, what you call hell, he calls home. That's exactly what I felt when I crossed the line. I'd finally made it back home, but there was a storm brewing, the same borderline medical emergency that happens after every ultra race I finish, which meant we had to get back to our crew cabin in Breckenridge, Stat. I started out the window, fixated on my North Star as it tailed us for the 45-minute drive, tempting me to leave the soft life of balance and comfort behind and follow it. That told me the Leadville was not the one-off I had assumed it to be. Part of my hesitation in signing up for the first place was because I'd already done it. I'd run damn near every meaningful race in the ultra game. I'd been there and done it all, and now I knew that it wasn't enough. What was next? Was it possible to operate as a full-time savage at 45 years old? And if I gave it a shot, how long could I hold out? Those were questions for another night, because before we pulled up into the driveway, my body had already started to tighten up. I could feel tremors coming on too. And while I knew this was next, while I knew what was next, that was uncharted territory for Kish. The post-ultra unraveling was about to begin. Again, apologies for all the stuttering. But David found his dog once again, and man, I think that dude was placed there by a higher power to give David that scrap and to reignite that dog in him, that fire in him, and to finally sort of kill off that part-time savage. Although, he says at the end there he doesn't know where he's going to take him, doesn't know what's next for him. He does know that he doesn't want to be soft again. And so he wants to dig down deep and do something about that. But it sucked, man. Sucked about TJ falling back there and not being able to really stay on pace with David. Although being David's pacer, he was kind of faltering there a bunch. And he kind of held David back a lot there. But, in life, a lot of the time we're going to get things that just don't want to go our way. Don't want to go the way that we plan it to, or hope it to, or want it to. And this was just one of those circumstances. There's a fair bit more of the book I want to cover here, but sort of going back to the book, David's sort of made it back to the cabin. He's made it back to sort of experiences post-ultra sort of ceremony, as he calls it, that it happens every single time he does an ultra marathon. So, back to the book. The crushing agony in my hips flexors was searing. The only other time I'd felt anything like it was during the Wednesday night of my second hell week, when I was rousted after a 5-minute power nap on the beach. Everyone else on my boat crew was getting a full hour, but not me. Psycho Pete was the instructor I hated the most. Wanted a private audience. I remember trying to stand up with the maniac in my face. I felt like my hips were trapped in a vice. The only thing that would ease the throb was curling up in a fetal position. So that's what I did. In Breckenridge, tripping. The only thing that would have eased the throb was curling up in a fetal position. So that's what I did in Breckenridge. Tripping on how pain has the power to bring you back at a time like nothing else. As I lay there, shivering, sweating at the same time, I could have sworn I was back in Raynaud Island, getting wet and sandy. Kish was terrified. She watched me, timed my rhythmic beats, and listened to my bones rattle as she mapped out emergency contingencies in her head. Was I in shock? Was I having some sort of altitude reaction? Breckenridge was at 9,600 feet. She was concerned my condition could deteriorate fast. But I wasn't worried about any of that. I knew that this was my old friend, Breakdown, my final phase of Ultra. When I first got into endurance events, I loved the breakdown phase, because suffering made me feel alive, and reminded me that I'd gone all out. This time, I didn't relish the same way, but I knew the breakdown was a byproduct of an all-out effort, and that if I explored the crevices of my mind, I would find valuable lessons, which tend to spill out with any unraveling. Most people prefer to avoid breakdowns like this because the suffering can be so overwhelming. It just might mark you forever. I embrace breakdown and welcome the scarring. There is a hell of a lot of information in scar tissue. Scars are proof of past is real. Physical scars never go away, and when you look at them, they can bring you right back to the specific place and time. But the scar tissue that builds up around the old injury is weak. Professional fighters who have been hit in the face thousands of times bleed faster than those who've never been punched. Once you've been cut deep, you are forever vulnerable to bleeding. The same is true for the mental and emotional scars that we all carry with us. The scars we cannot see, they might be invisible, but they affect us much more severely than physical scars. Mental and emotional scars are our weak spots, and they can open up just as easily as physical scars unless we do work to strengthen them. You haven't dealt with your scars. They can alter your life's path. You will be prone to failure during difficult physical and emotional situations, whether that's during an athletic event, at work, or in your home life. And eventually, you will land back in the front of your mirror that never lies. Breakdown is at its own kind of mirror. Whatever you're made of is laid out in front of you, clear and plain. The history and mindset became. Apologies. Your history and mindset became a weathered old map, rigid with scars. And if you read them like an archaeologist on a dig, you might uncover the code you need to rise again and become better and stronger. Because there is no transformation without breakdown. And there are always another evolution, another skin to shed, a better or deeper version of ourselves waiting to be revealed. I did a quick inventory of my scars as I faded into the slippery headspace between waking and dreaming. So Goggins is having a hard time dealing with this breakdown that usually comes after every ultra marathon that he endures. I can't say I've ever experienced anything like that myself, and a lot of that that he's going through right now seems to, like he said, lead to a lot of introspectiveness and a lot of lessons and a lot of teachings and a lot of wisdom he tends to find in those breakdowns, in those scenarios. So, getting back to the book here, Goggins is presently in this state of recovery from the ultra. So he's laying down in his bed, he's having the shakes, he's going through the motions. And as he's doing so, he's having all these memories flash back and these introspective moments flash back through his mind. One of those moments is from him being a kid with his mum. They've just escaped from his dad. And they've gone back to his mum's parents' place. And it's like, I think, 1983 at this time. He's gone back to his mum's parents' place, and this is kind of his first time stepping through that door, realizing that, okay, this is where we're going to live for a little bit. And as he's reflecting on that, he's thinking about, his grandfather, Sergeant Jack, as he called him. So, back to the book. Sergeant Jack was half black and half Native American. And though he was only 5'7", he had a larger presence about him. He worked as a cook in the Air Force and still dressed in military attire every day. He used usually a flight suit or one of his battle dress uniforms on weekdays. His crisp dress blues were reserved for church and all other formal occasions. Sergeant Jack took great pride in detailed stewardship. He cared about everything he owned. He had two separate two-car garages and 4 cars on the property, Cadillacs and Chevrolets. From the mid-century, like his well-tended house and garden, those cars were pristine. Born in 1905, he came of age in the southern Indiana during the height of Jim Crow, and when it was dangerous to hell to be a black man in America, and a wrong word or look could spark a lynch mob. His parents were poor, and he wasn't babied as a kid. His formal education ended in the 4th grade when he had to get a job to help support the family. So, when I landed at his house, he passed along what he'd learned. What they taught him worked as far as he was concerned. He had military pension, he owned his house free and clear, sang with every car in his garage, and he had money in the bank. Sergeant Jack was squared the fuck away, and he got there with a self-reliance on detail and discipline. Each morning before he woke me up, he walked the perimeter of his property, surveying the land, several trees, and the long, unpaved driveway blanketed in snow, white gravel. The house had 2 porches, one on either side, and he liked them swept and his rain gutters cleared of debris at all times, because storms come down hard in the part of the country. Sergeant Jack couldn't stand seeing leaf litter, dust, or weeds. Everything had to be immaculate. The daily task list was always at least 10 tasks long. Sometimes it stretched at over 20. The first order of business in the morning was to sweep both porches, front and back. After that, I had to get out of the rake and collect a bag of the stray leaves, and that had fallen overnight. In the spring and summer, there wasn't a huge job, but in the fall, when the leaves turned, it took hours. Hedges and grass grew like crazy during the humid Indiana summer, and that meant mowing the lawn manually in a perfect grid and clipping the hedges almost daily. Weeds were always a problem in the summer, and as soon as they began poking through the gravel on the driveway, I had to get on my hands and knees and dig into the dirt to pull those fuckers free. The gravel dug into my skin, leaving scrapes and bruises. To me, it didn't feel a whole lot different from scraping gum off the skate rink floor at first. That's the skate rink his father used to own and make him work at. In those early weeks, I took Sergeant Jack's tasks as a sign that no matter where I lived or who I lived with, I was bound to suffer at the hands of a bully. My scared young mind was deep in the woe is me rinse cycle. So was my brother's. He didn't last long on Sergeant Jack detail and returned to Buffalo pretty quickly. Crazy to think that Buffalo seemed like a better option. I wasn't going anywhere, but that doesn't mean I enjoyed it. At first I despised the man and attempted to rebel. He'd come shake me awake and I wouldn't move. Then he'd splash water on my face and I took that too. If I still didn't get up, he'd come to my bedside with a metal trash can lid and whack it with a wooden spoon right next to my ear. Until I was up on my way to the garage, I'd pick up my orders. I didn't yet realize that Sergeant Jack was no trueness. He was my Mr. Miyagi. Not in the sense that each chore came with specific instructions. All those instructions would manifest in skills that would deliver karate tournament salvation. He never sat back and said, "I'm teaching you how to be a responsible young man," yet I learned the valuable life lesson. Many of us will meet people like Sergeant Jack in our lives, an elder or teacher who refuses to tell us what we want to hear in the way we want to hear it. When we're emotionally scarred like I was, and had a very hard look or gruff reply, any order or mandate can feel like a personal attack, and oftentimes we can tune them out to our own detriment. It took me a long time to understand that there wasn't anything personal about Sergeant Jack. Jack's approach, or his list, it was all transactional. Yeah, so he's come back to his childhood where he's thinking that, they've escaped from one hardship only to be landed into another. Obviously, this one, as he acknowledges, is nowhere near as bad as what his father's was, or how his father was to him and his mother. But still, nevertheless, it was hard. It was hard on him, being a young kid and then thinking that you're escaping, coming to salvation, but really just landing in another hardship to people that don't care. That's what he says. He says that his grandparents didn't care, that they came from a very terrible situation where they were both beaten, all this other sort of stuff. They didn't care. They showed no sympathy, and they showed no love for it. And he felt that every day because Sergeant Jack would always make him work and make him work for his stay there, essentially. He sort of had this view of David and David's mother that if they were going to stay there, they better earn their keep type of thing. Which is pretty gnarly, I suppose. But we're going to see where this comes to in a moment here. Months passed and the tyranny did not relent. By then, I knew exactly what Sergeant Jack expected from me. I knew how to cut grass, rake the leaves, and wash the cars the way he wanted. But I felt sorry for myself because few, if any, of my friends had to do chores at all, let alone complete a daily military-grade task list. Plus, my grandparents still hadn't demonstrated any empathy for what I'd been through during the first 8 years of my life. Clearly, they didn't understand me. I was housed in their guest room with dated furniture and wallpaper. I didn't have basketball posters on my walls. I wasn't given toys or cool sneakers or a stereo. Did they put out any effort to make that room more accommodating for a kid? Hell no. The only way I could get back at them was by doing half-assed jobs instead of working hard at all important tasks of the day. Of course, I was only victimizing myself, though. If I wasn't done before dinner time, they'd call me in. The meals were not kid-friendly. There were no burgers or hot dogs. It was baked chicken or roast meats with sides of collard greens and cabbage. I was expected to clean my plate, whether I liked the food or not, and then go back out and finish whichever task remained undone. I often worked well past sundown. I couldn't understand why my grandparents treated me this way. The only explanation my jacked-up 8-year-old brain could find was that, like my father, they hated me and resented my presence in their home. Which is why in the early days, earning Sergeant Jack's checkmark of approval meant nothing to me, and I sleepwalked through his tasks like a zombie. I figured any half-assed attempt was good enough. Fuck it, fuck him, I thought, and I hated the old bastard. I didn't care what he thought of me. 6 months later, though, I still loathed the man. I changed my approach to the task list. I got up after the first wake-up call without delay. There would be no more early morning baptisms for me. Instead, I focused on the details Sergeant Jack always noticed and finished each job right the first time. That was the only way I'd get any free time to play basketball. However, my new approach produced an unexpected side effect as well. A sense of pride in a job well done. In fact, the sense of pride came to mean more to me than basketball time. When I watched his car collection, a weekly assignment, I knew every drop of water had to be wiped away from before the first coat of wax. I used an SOS pad to get the white walls gleaming and buffed the hell out of every panel. I also used Armor All on the dashboards and with all the vinyl insides. I buffed the leather seats too. It bothered me if I saw streaks in the glass or chrome. I was annoyed if I missed a soiled spot or cut a corner here or there or on any of the chores. I didn't know it at the time, but that was a sign that I was actually healing. When a half-assed job doesn't bother you, it speaks volumes about the kind of person you are. And until you start feeling a sense of pride and self-respect in the work you do, no matter how small or overlooked those jobs might be, you will continue to half-ass your life. I knew I had every reason in the world to rebel and remain a lazy motherfucker. I also sensed that it would only make me more miserable, so I adapted. But no matter how well I did or how fast I completed a given task, there was no attaboys or weekly allowance, no ice cream cones or surprise gifts, hugs or high fives. In Sergeant Jack's mind, I was finally doing what I should have been doing all along. Damn, man. It's rough, I guess. Nowhere near as rough as what he came from, albeit, but nevertheless, still pretty fucking rough. Especially being at 8 years old and being thrusted into such a strict regimen. Like he said, none of his friends were like that. Damn near no kids are like that today, right? Like they're just given an iPad and a couple of kiss cuddles and they're on the way, right? But that's the thing that he started to realize, that he started to take pride in his work. And the way he said that when we sort of look at our own work and we don't take pride in our work, that it reflects tantamount on us and ourselves and the way that we are. I remember reading that for the first time and thinking, yeah, that's completely right. Because I don't know if I believe in the statement of how you do one thing is how you do everything, because the simple rationalization of that is that you might be pretty lazy flicking on a switch on and off, or throwing your dinner in the microwave, heat it up instead of the oven. That would make it crispier and taste better, but the microwave's quicker. So while you might be lazy in some respects in your life, other respects you might be fully dedicated. You might be fully into that. So it's tough to say how you do one thing is how you do everything. But in the same regards, I fully and capable of understanding and comprehending the sentiment, at least, that, if you do a half-assed job and you're okay with that, what does that say about you? And so it sort of makes you sort of sit there and reflect and think about, okay, well, if I am just sitting here doing just mediocre, does that mean I'm a mediocre person? Will I then eventually lead a mediocre life? You probably are, and you probably will, I think. And, yeah, that's something that I've been thinking about and struggling with and grappling with myself in my own life, in my own journey that I have here, in not being remotely lazy, knowing that, is this, I'm constantly thinking to myself, is this all that I can do? Is this the best that I can do? Could I do more? And that's kind of where my company's quote, I don't know, see, I'm wearing Hampson Consultants here, but the unofficial slogan to Hampson Consultants is like, do more, be more, because the idea is that we give you back a lot of your time, things like that, but so that you can do more and be more in your company and business, because we buy you back so much time. But that aside, I think it's bled into more of my life in a greater sense than just my company, than my business. It's bled into how I sort of view everything. I can only be more if I do more, and I can only do more if I am more. In that sense, so to be more requires you to do more, and I think on that note as well is not just by doing more makes you be more, but it's the way in which you do more. It's the way in which you do certain actions, you do certain tasks in your life, in your day-to-day, that you have the utmost respect for yourself by doing a great job, whether you like it or not. So whether or not you hate your boss, whether or not you hate your job, whether or not you hate certain aspects of your life, doing a bad job only reflects on you and only affects you, really, at the end of the day. Like, it might affect them, might hold up the job, might ruin their work or something like that, might get back at them that you're trying to do, but at the end of the day, you're the one that has to live with being a half-assed person, right? Back to the book. Sergeant Jack was a hard-ass teacher, but kids need hard-ass teachers sometimes. I know what might hurt your ears because things are different now. We are warned of the lasting effects of stress on children. To not compensate, parents strategize about how to make their children's lives comfortable and easy, but is the real world always comfortable? Is it easy? Life is not G-rated. We must prepare kids for the world as it is. Our generation is training kids to become full-fledged members of the Entitlement nation, which ultimately makes them easy prey for lions among us. Our ever-softening society doesn't just affect children. Adults fall in the same trap. Even those of us who have achieved great things, every single one of us is just another frog in the soon-to-be boiling water that is our soft-ass culture. We take unforeseen obstacles personally. We are ready to be outraged at all times by the evil bullshit of the world. Believe me, I know all about the evil and have dealt with more bullshit than most. But if you catalog your scars to use them as excuses or a bargaining chip to make life easier for yourself, you've missed an opportunity to become better and grow stronger. Sergeant Jack knew what awaited me as an adult. He was preparing me for the grip of life, whether he knew it or not. The man was training me to be a savage. The evolutionary question is the exact same for everybody. It doesn't matter who you are. You could be a young person looking to tap into your power, become great, or a midlife adult or a senior who's never done a fucking thing but wants to achieve something before it's too late. Or maybe you've achieved a lot but are overcome an injury or illness or simply uninspired and caught in emotional and physical quicksand. First, you must recognize that you have fallen off or are perpetually falling short. Next, accept that you're on your own. Nobody will come to save you. They may show you an example, like Sergeant Jack did for me, and I'm doing for you right now, but it will be up to you to do the work. Then you must become a disciple of discipline. Even after we moved into our own place, whenever my mum had to work later or go on out of town, I'd spend the night at Sergeant Jack's, and sure enough, there would be a wake-up call and a bill in the morning for in the form of a task list. And yes, like my dad, Sergeant Jack was a mean old man who expected me to do as he said and work for free. Excuse me. But unlike trueness, he wrapped something valuable in the discipline he served. And whenever I put maximum focus on each task, I earned a sense of pride that I hadn't been able to find anyplace else. Disciple of discipline. That's a fantastic quote. Right there. And then the way that we're all becoming full-fledged members of Entitlement Nation. You know, I am so, maybe because I have a daughter, and I have a kid, right? Most people don't, I suppose. Not nowadays much, right? A crumbling population, that's for sure. But I'm very much aware and very present of the way in which I raise Aura, my daughter, in the sense that, you know, I don't want to be soft on her because I know that life is not going to be soft on her, and I know that it's going to be a greater struggle than, you know, most of us care to admit. And so there's a thing that I remember a lot of military member guys talk about, is that they would train harder in their exercises, in their rotations, in their simulation scenarios and things like that, than actual combat, actual war, and actual things would be, or would require them to be, so that they would be conditioned in all the training that they would do, so that when it came time to the real deal wasn't as bad as the training. At least they would try to be as close to that as possible, where the real deal wasn't as bad as the training, in the sense that they worked harder in the training. And I think there's a lot to that, right? There's a lot to us to, you know, I think Goggins talks about this in particular, is training without a goal. Just training without a goal in mind, which will create you to be one fucking heck of a resilient motherfucker, as he would say, right? But training without a goal in mind and training without a purpose, you know, and still being able to keep up that level of high intensity training, high intensity work ethic, will prepare you for everything else life has to throw at you. And life has so much shit to throw at you right when you least expect it as well. That's its fucking favorite time to throw shit at you. I should fucking know. I should know. And I'm sure many people do. And I'm sure you know as well, right? Like, I'm sure life has thrown a lot of things at you. And, you know, I hope you've coped with that well. But, you know, there's just so many things that, you know, if we just prepared ourselves daily and worked harder at ourselves daily, then it wouldn't be so bad. It wouldn't be so tough. But myself included, like many people, it's nice to relax when the time is relaxing and work when the time is working, and just let those periods be those periods. But it makes those periods harder, that's for sure. And I, you know, myself included, I have a terrible habit that when times are really tough, you know, I ramp things up really hard to the point where, you know, I'm really struggling to get things in, struggling to breathe, like my head's underwater the whole time. And as soon as the coast is clear, as soon as the waters have calmed down, I put my head out of the water and I'm just relaxing. I'm just breathing because I've just worked so hard. But what happens is then, you know, I'm ill prepared for the next storm because I'm just relaxing in the water now, you know, and then all of a sudden the next storm is upon me. You know, I've been relaxing, haven't been training, I'm a bit weaker, a bit, You know, I'm not as strong as I was when I was fighting that other storm, and now I'm at it again. So that's something I grapple with a lot personally, and I in recent times it's been a lot better, for sure. In recent times, a lot has changed and a lot has progressed in the right direction of which I want it to go, which has been fantastic. And a lot of my life right now, thankfully I've got a beautiful fiance that is on the same path as me, so that helps a lot. David Goggins talks about it in the book here, about having the right people in the foxhole. Foxhole meaning, you know, in war and in combat and things like that, you'd get pinned down and you'd have a little foxhole to sort of fight out of, essentially, you know, on the battlefield. And whoever's in your foxhole, you want it to be a fucking pretty decent person to fight alongside you. So he talks about taking accountability for who's in your foxhole. And if nobody in your foxhole is good, or doesn't have your back, or isn't ill prepared, is just crying in the corner, not helping out, then you should go out and get another foxhole. Find your own foxhole, you know, and people will come along that will have your back. But that aside, I think, you know, my journey, my path right now, and hopefully you guys are going to see this unfold. I'll try and make a lot more videos with this as well, and you'll see what that is in the future. But the journey of becoming a disciple of discipline is well underway. I will say that. Whoops. Back to the book. Discipline builds mental endurance, because when effort is your main priority, you stop looking for everything to be enjoyable. Our phones and social media have turned too many of us inside out with envy and greed as we get inundated with other people's success. The new cars, houses, big contracts, resorts, vacations, and romantic getaways. We see how much fun everybody else is having and feel like the world is passing us by, as we bitch about it and then wonder why we are not where we want to be. When you become disciplined, you don't have time for that bullshit. Your insecurities become alarm bells, reminding you that doing your chores or homework to the utmost of your ability and putting in the extra time on your job or in the gym are requirements for a life well lived. A drive of self-optimization and a daily repetition will build your capacity for work and give you confidence that you can take on more. With discipline as your engine, your workload and output will double, then triple. What you won't see, at least not at first, is the fact that your own discipline, your own personal evolution, has begun to bear fruit. You won't see it because you'll be too busy taking action. Discipline does not have a belief system. It transcends class, color, and gender. It cuts through all noise and strife. If you think that you are behind in the 8-ball for whatever reason, discipline is a great equalizer. It erases all disadvantages, and nowadays, it doesn't matter where you are from or who you are. If you're disciplined, there will be no stopping you. Fantastic quote there. Absolutely fantastic. I'm going to skip ahead here. There's a little section that I would like to read, though, just before a bigger skip. Skipping a little bit more in time, David sort of, you know, didn't see his grandfather much, became a little bit of a rebellious teenager, fell away from discipline, and began to sort of be, you know, again, the rebellious teenager, the typical rebellious teenager, and didn't like hard work, didn't do all those things. But then his grades started to fail, things of that nature started to fail, and he started to realize that, you know, he was falling off the path, and his life was going to shit, essentially. And he started to think about, you know, who he's going to be in the future. And so he went back to get some discipline from his grandfather. So he moved into his grandfather's house again to wake up and go through the task list again and again and again with grandfather, get that discipline back ingrained into his spirit and soul. And thankfully he did that, because it made him a whole lot better, and it's actually what helped him get through basic training in the military, in the Navy. And that's actually where it takes me to in the book. Minutes before waking up to the morning after Leadville, rank as fuck, with my shitty shorts still looped around my thighs, I flashed to one of the last times I saw Sergeant Jack alive. It was my graduation from basic training in the Air Force. In spite of his poor health, he was adamant about attending as a World War II vet. He was given a VIP seat on his dais among the brass. All the years I knew him, he'd never said "good job" to me. I never once heard him say "I love you." But when they announced my name and I marched across the stage in my dress blues to officially become an airman, like him, we locked eyes, and I watched one solitary tear snake down his cheek. Sergeant Jack was beaming. It was obvious that he was proud as hell to be my grandfather. Man. There's a lot more in the book about Goggins' relationship with his grandfather, and a lot more about what his grandfather did for him, and obviously what he didn't do for him. But there's so much more in the book that I'm skipping over, just so everybody knows, so that you can go pick it up and read it yourself and still have so much to take away. But when I heard that the first time, after hearing what his grandfather was to him and learning what his grandfather did for him in regards to he being the foundation and the cornerstone for later years in his life, to reconnect to that, to become a savage. Obviously, we know the story. He fell off and, didn't come back to it till later. Again, but that's just what we covered before about how there is no one pill to cure it all. It's a daily effort and a daily decision to be the best that you can be. But I love reading that bit because, life is quite beautiful like that. We often don't get attaboys or good jobs or any sort of tangible rewards or signs that we're going in the right direction or have completed something good, at least not outside of schooling or anything like that. Life is just keeps clocking by. And so it was very, very sweet moment to see that his grandfather made the effort to come there and show his admiration for his grandson, David. I think we got to appreciate when we can these small but fleeting moments. Back to the book. This chapter, I thought it was great. Title of the chapter. It's called The Art of Getting Hit in the Mouth. Leadville, so back to the present day-ish. Leadville reminded me of what being... got the shadow on it. Leadville reminded me of what being missing in my life for way too long. The steep trails and the waves of pain and exhaustion, and yet another cage match with my own demons. I appreciated having a pacer and being able to share the experience with Kish for the first time. I even relished the aftermath, and I left Colorado wanting more. The following week, I helped my mom move from Nashville to Las Vegas. On a 26-hour drive, I had plenty of time to complete my after-action report and review each aspect of the race. One thing about Leadville that I kept coming back to was how much bigger the sport of ultra running had become since my heyday. Back then, 100-milers were run by hardcore endurance athletes like me who sought deeper water. That no longer seemed to be the case. There was great beauty in that. It was evidence that more motherfuckers were digging deeper. They were curious. They craved more self-knowledge and were willing to pay the toll in pain and suffering. I respected that. But if 100 milers had become accessible, where was the new deep end? That thought both excited and unnerved me, because it implied that despite all I'd done in the past, there was still more to give and a lot further to go. I knew that, of course. Shit, I preached it all the time. But now I felt it like a slap in the face. I didn't see it coming. It's funny how our goals are only as elastic as our sense of self, of who we are and what we think we can accomplish. If all you've ever done is run 3 miles at a clip, then a 10-mile run can feel as far as the moon. Your mind will compile reasons why the distance is beyond you, and you may believe them. If 10 becomes your new normal, then half or a full marathon may be the next step. After a marathon comes ultra. Each time you level up, your mind will step in like an overbearing chaperone and try to shut down the party. That very dynamic was playing out in my mind on the long drive. I flashed to a 30-mile run I'd done with Cameron Haynes in Oregon back in December 2018. While we hammered the trails around his hometown, he gushed about a brand new race he'd finished 2 months earlier. It wasn't a 100-miler. It was a 240.3-mile trail race with nearly 30,000 feet of elevation gain. That's more than the elevation of Mount Everest. Among the red rock formations, sheer drop-offs, the desolate peaks of Moab, Utah, 240 fucking miles? Was that the new deep end? When I was learning to swim as a teenager, I spent all my time on the shallow end of the pool because there was no fear there. Even after I become proficient, I swam laps in the shallow end because it soothed me knowing with each stroke I damn near scraped bottom. If I got too tired or wanted to quit, I could simply stand up, and that gave me both comfort and confidence. It allowed me to work on my stroke without fear getting in the way. There's nothing inherently wrong with that, as long as we are clear that the shallow end work we put in is all about preparation for the deep end, but that was not my mindset at the point in my life. The way the pool complex was laid out made it impossible to ignore the deep end. Each day I left the locker room, I had to walk by the 10-foot section. Occasionally I stepped to the ledge and looked down. That 10-foot floor felt bottomless. To me, as I tucked tail and strolled toward the cozy little 3-foot marker, with each step, my dread faded while my comfort swelled, and that fucked with my psyche. I did my best to clear it out of my mind as I swam, but it lodged in there like a thorn, lap after lap, day after day. When something continually looms in the back of your mind, like a taunting, that's an alarm. It's a signal that you need to evaluate and address the issue, or it may become a lifelong fear, looming larger each day, until it morphs into an obstacle you may never overcome. There is nothing wrong with being afraid or hesitant. We all have our reasons for remaining in the shallow end, but we must make our shallow end a training ground. Too often we treat our training terrain as a lazy boy. We lay back, get comfy, and they have the audacity to wonder why our lives aren't getting better, while we do the same shit we've always done. I should have been using my time in the shallow end as mental preparation, imagining the deep water with every stroke. You have to train your mind as if you were already there. If you get tired while swimming laps in the shallow end, don't give yourself the option to stand up in the middle of the lane. The only resting point should be the gunnel at the end of the pool. That way, when you get to the 10-foot end, you know from experience that you can make the distance. But back then, I was merely a survivor. I wasn't a warrior capable of thriving in discomfort. So I chose to bury my dread and logged my pool hours in the shallow end with no end in sight. A lot of us grow out of the feeling of shallow end, but stay there because we fear the unknown. I'm thinking of those who remain in a secure job they hate instead of cutting ties and starting up their own business, or applying for a new position elsewhere. Apologies. Most are intimidated by the unknown future, filled with variables and consequences they cannot control or foresee. I know a person who ran other people's thriving businesses for 20 years, but was afraid to run her own. She knew every aspect of what it took to become a successful entrepreneur, but rather than acknowledge her experience and use it for uses a confidence supply. She let her irrational fears keep her running in place for someone else. You need to evaluate what you are feeling. Not every emotion deserves to be ratified. Remember, if you stay where you've always been, you will never learn if you have what it takes to venture into the deep water. I felt a glimmer of that old foreboding as we zoomed through the southwest of the way to Nevada with Moab on my mind. I shook my head in disbelief. Was my mind still trying to stop me after all these years? I thought I'd tamed that motherfucker. And I had, but Moab 240 was something entirely new to me. So, fear was a natural response. By then, I knew that there was no tricks around fear. The only way to neutralize it was to commit to doing the fucking thing that freaked me out, and then proceed to outsmart my fear through knowledge and preparation. That night, I Googled the race, surveyed the course. It was a roller coaster, traveling up and down 4,000 feet in elevation to 10,500 feet and back again. The weather would be unpredictable, with the potential to deliver serious heat and extreme cold. The distances between aid stations ranging from 9 or 19 miles were more than any other event I had ever done, so I would have to haul a lot more gear than I did for Leadville. The suck factor would be high, but you had 110 hours to finish, which meant you could break it up if you wanted to. A lot of people did, but that's not how I tackle these events. I run straight through and tempt the course to reveal just how fit I am, physically and mentally. On August 23rd, I emailed the race headquarters in Moab and inquired about signing up. I received a reply within 24 hours. The race was scheduled for early October. I could still apply for a spot. That gave me 6 weeks to train. Those weeks were already packed with multiple speaking gigs, work commitments, and a lot of travel. All good. I'd find time to put in 100-mile weeks required to be ready for the longest run of my career. Damn. What's so comforting about David's book is, I'm talking about comfort zones, right? But what's so comforting about the book is that, oftentimes you and I, we sort of live in this world where we only see it through the curated guise and lens of Instagram, social media, where everybody seems like they got it the fuck figured out, right? And that they've swallowed, again, I'm going back to this again, but this is just such a big learning for me, right? I mean, I always knew it, but it's just when those things click, right? You have that epiphany. It's just like, you realize that no matter how much you do, no matter how much you accomplish, no matter how much you come, no matter how far you've come, you always, day by day, need to consciously make the actions to be that person, to continue to be that person, to continue to strive to be that person. It's a day by day, minute by minute, decision by decision. And it always will be, forever. And I think so many of us, myself included, I'm speaking for myself right now, is that I get wrapped up so much in my goals, my aspirations, and what I want for the future. But I oftentimes forget about the here and now, which is all that we have. It's all that really matters. And that's all that should really matter to us, right? Because that's the only thing that's changeable. That's the only thing that we can control. But yet we lose sight of that. And so, David, where he's at, he's realizing that, while he became a part-time savage and stopped doing 100-mile races for 5 years, and he lost that dog in him, eventually found it again in Leadville, he realized that he was still in the shallow end. Well, what was originally his deep end became a shallow end, rather. And he started to realize that, okay, shit, I know for a fact I shouldn't be in the shallow end to be in the shallow end. I should be in the shallow end to prepare me for the deep end. And so now he's realizing he's in the shallow end again, so he's got to think about, okay, well, where's my new deep end? And I love that life is so vast and so incredible that even if you were immortal, you would never be able to find your true deep end. There would always be another deep end to dive into. I think that's incredible. I think that's I don't know. I don't know about you, but that's I'm getting excited right now. I feel like I go run a little bit. Back to the book. My initial test came right after meeting up with my crew for the first time at mile 17.8. So, oh, sorry. I think I skipped a bit, did I? Oh, yeah, no. So, apologies. So, he's, the race day's come, and he's lined up for the big 240 miler. He's started to kick into it. He's finding his stride. He doesn't have a, he's got GPS tracker on, but the course is so big and so vast that it's not really all mapped out on the GPS app and stuff like that. So while you can follow the GPS, there are some parts of the course which aren't marked properly and things like that. So he's just getting into the flow of the race. And so the race has begun, the 240 miler. And so this is him at 17 miles and 8. So back to the book. My initial test came right after meeting up with my crew for the first time at mile 17.8, where I stopped long enough to stuff my pack with everything I needed for the next 55 miles. Although there would be aid stations, they were not accessible to crews, which meant I wouldn't see mine again until mile 72. I grabbed gels, powders, extra food, and batteries for backup headlamp. I had a 1.5 litre bladder zipped into my pack, and 2 water bottles slotted in the pack's shoulder pockets. But what made the next 10 hours so hard wasn't the length of the extra weight, it was the temperature. The first 72 miles of the course ran across a blend of terrain. At times, we were in trails, but without warning, the trail would disappear from under our feet, and I find myself running down a sloping rock face, wondering where the hell it went. Early on, there was a cluster of 10 of us or so out there, our heads on a swivel, checking the app to see if our blinking triangle was still in the dotted line. After 4 or 5 hours, we were all strung out, and then it was just me, out there, alone, navigating on the run. I didn't mind being out alone, because it kept me thinking, and the complex terrain demanded I keep my situational awareness, SA, as he's abbreviating it, situational awareness, SA, way up. I dialed my nutrition and hydration, making sure to eat and drink at planned intervals, regardless of how good I felt. Any blip in the trail, any potential wrong turn, made me stop and locate where I was and where I needed to be. Sometimes the cross-country sections lasted a mile or longer. Other times we were in a distinct trail or road for hours. I was running well and all was going according to plan until I passed the 50-mile mark. That's when the desert turned cold. The sun was still up, but the wind was unseasonably crisp, and that was bad news. I have a condition called Raynaud's phenomenon. It's cold weather, the blood flow to my extremities becomes restricted, and the blood pulls up in my core. Back when I was stationed in Chicago, the running ultras almost every weekend, I ran during the brutal Chicago winter, armed with 2 layers of thin gloves beneath a pair of ski gloves. Over all of that, I pull on thick wool socks, and even then my hands would be fucked up. I bought a pair of battery-powered heating gloves just before my frozen otter race in 2014, which kept my hands at normal body temperature and enabled my blood to keep flowing. I won that race, in part because of those gloves. I brought those same heated gloves with me to Utah. But Moab in early October wasn't supposed to be anywhere close to as cold as midwinter Chicago. Because I had to carry all my gear, I was due to see my crew again mile 72.3, not long after sunset. I didn't think it made sense to pack these gloves in the bulky batteries. My strategy for races like this has always been to keep everything simple and light. I race streamlined. I hadn't guessed my fingers would stiffen up from the cold, with the sun still out. I knew they might soon become useless. So I stopped, pulled on a pair of thin gloves, which were essentially glove liners, removed my bladder from my pack, and secured it against my chest. I'd had the bladder and drinking hose freeze up in races before, including that frozen otter. and I couldn't afford to be dehydrated and freezing at the same time. There was an aid station around 57.3, kitted out with water and food stands. They had someone grilling burgers and another stirring a pot of soup. There was plenty of seating so runners could kick back and eat a drink for their fill. But it wasn't a crew meetup. So the one thing I needed most, my heated gloves, remained out of reach. I didn't eat too much, and though my fingers had almost lost dexterity, I managed to refill my bladder. After that, there wasn't much to do but keep pushing. While the sun slanted lower and lower in the sky, thanks to Raynaud's, my hands and feet felt as heavy and inflexible as ice bricks. My fingers were frozen stiff, but my chest was steaming because so much warm blood pooled in my torso. That made me thirsty as hell. I sucked my bladder dry by mile 64. I still had 2 full water bottles that I could drink from because they were the type that I needed to squeeze. I still had 2 full water bottles, but I couldn't drink from them because they were the type that I needed to squeeze to get flow. I brainstormed how to take the lid off with my mouth and could have done it if I had stopped to take the time, but that would have made me even colder. So I decided against it. I was hungry and as shit, but I couldn't access the food in my pack because my fingers were so wrecked. All I could think about was reaching the aid station to get those damn heated gloves on my hands. Alone, beneath starry skies, I zeroed in on staying on course and on task. That meant minding the trail and GPS tracker while keeping the steady pace. But time ticks slowly when you're freezing and thirsty, and you know you could solve your problems if only your fucking hands worked. I wasn't surprised to feel my energy draining away. My hands hadn't been this cold since SEAL training, and I leaned into those memories and pushed me uphill. Once again, I called upon past triumphs to push me forward. I wouldn't let myself bitch about the fact that my body was beginning to betray me yet again. I blocked that shit out and ran on. Somehow, I made it and slow jogged into 72.3 mile aid station, dehydrated and cold all the way through. It was dark as fuck, and there were dozens of support crews spread out on flat patches of dirt on both sides of a gravel road in the middle of nowhere. My bones rattled, but only for as long as it took to register what was happening and find my team. Then I reined it in. I didn't want to show my crew as much as I twitched. Crewing races is thankless enough. I didn't need to concern about anything beyond getting me ready for the next leg. So, man, he's in bad shape. His Raynaud's condition where all the blood from his extremities go into his core. It's tough. There's a photo of just, you probably won't be able to see it too well, of his hands essentially turning white and losing all their color and blood, and you can't really close them or open them or do anything with them. Damn, man. You know, there's plenty of people that run ultras, and there's plenty of people who run them very successfully. What makes Goggins special is that not only does he run them and run them successfully, but he runs them with all this jacked up shit that's happening to him. And I think that's the key of what makes him so impressive of an athlete to follow. If you can just give him one label, athlete, I don't even think it does him justice. But the fact that he can do all this on busted ankles, busted knees, busted heart, busted lungs, busted hands, busted everything, and still pull through and still overcome it. Like, damn, that's something that makes you really sort of look at yourself and consider, shit, man, what am I doing right now? And I think that's not only David's ability to be an incredible athlete, but his ability to overcome these circumstances, no matter how tough the situation is. That's what's so absolutely fucking inspiring about him. Back to the book. Man's fingers are white as fresh snow. You know something's truly fucked up. He did his best to stuff my frozen hands into gloves. It was like dressing a baby. He had to force each finger into place one by one. So he's finally at the aid station with his crew, and he can't even get those heated gloves. He can't even get those heated gloves onto his own hands because his hands are frozen, essentially. So he needs his friend to put him on, like dressing a baby, as he said. Man, that's how you know your hands are jacked. Okay, so getting back to the race, he's back on the trail. He's got his gloves on, and he's got his pacer. He's got a pacer with him this time now, so his rhythm's starting to get pretty good. So back to the book. I was running well so far, but we weren't even halfway done. I flashed back to the start when so many motherfuckers were getting excited. I wondered how they felt now. Exhausted, cold, scared. Were they still as motivated as they were 100 miles ago? That's why I never got emotional or excited at the beginning of something hard. The same is true when it comes to monitoring my progress. I never celebrate anything in the middle of a race. Better to stay calm, focused on my shit, and aware that what I've got myself into is not a game, and that there are hungry forces well beyond my control, waiting to pounce from behind. A 240-mile run will never be a joyride. If you're feeling happy with yourself, odds are the tide is about to turn. Apologies. That's why it's so important to stay humble and keep that SA up, situational awareness, up at all times. A lesson I would relearn the hard way as we left the aid station by the light of our headlamps and ran into a wide gravel road. The sun rose while we ran, and with my new pacer in charge of the lead navigation duties and the leader's fresh footprints to follow, I clocked into autopilot. I even put my phone away, the one with the GPS app I downloaded for the race. What did I need with that now with my co-pilot on nav duty? There are 3 crucial requirements to maintaining a high level of SA, situational awareness. The first is astute perception. You need to see the environment clearly. That means knowing where you are on the map and having a good idea where the pitfalls might lie. Sometimes the pitfall might be a member of your team who isn't squared away as you'd expect. It also requires a 360-degree comprehension of the current situation. You must understand the entire picture and take the time to investigate blind spots, areas you might not otherwise see because of exhaustion or low light. You also better have a plan to compensate for any limitations you identify. Finally, there's projection. Based on your perception and comprehension, what will your future status be? You can't make decisions based solely on the present. You need to think like a chess master and strategize several moves down the line. Unfortunately for me, I fucked all that up. When we hit the intersection near the bottom of a long descent, my pacer read the footprints and kept on running. I followed. A few clicks down the road, I noticed that those footprints had turned around, but didn't give it a second thought. Because I trust my pacer and never checked the GPS to confirm we were still on course, we just kept right on going. Kish was tracking our progress on her phone using Race Leaderboard, which updated our location every 5 minutes. She could see that I was floating farther and farther out of bounds, and it stressed her out. Race HQ noticed too, and like Kish, they sent messages and tried to call us for 2.5 hours. But my pacer's phone was out of range and mine was packed away. We didn't know that the race leaders had made the same wrong turn we did, but this phone somehow had reception and answered when headquarters called to alert him. That's why those footprints doubled back after a couple miles while we kept going for more than 10. Man. There's a great image of just how far off course they go. Lots of great images in this book. If you want to pick it up, you can see a lot of these things where he's got pictures of the race and the maps and the trail and how far he went off course and things like that. Back to the book. Part of me sensed we were lost, but I didn't realize that my pacer hadn't downloaded the GPS app properly because I never spot checked him. Spot checks are a regular part of Ranger School. Each candidate is required to carry several specific items in their bag throughout training, and ranger instructors are known to stop and ask random candidates to pull out any one of those specific items at any time. That's a spot check. I should have spot checked my pacer's phone and made 100% sure the app was operational before we left the aid station. Not because I didn't trust him, but because it was 4 in the morning and neither of us had slept. When I saw footprints disappear, I missed another opportunity to double check, and we were still on course. We hadn't seen a marker in miles, and both of us were out of food and water by the time we reached the next unmarked intersection. That's when my phone blew up with dozens of text messages and missed calls from Kish. He stopped cold, his phone in his hand, with a blank look in his face. He didn't even have to say it. Without a word, I turned and started running back in the other direction. Man, fuck, that fucking sucks. Especially on a 240-mile race. To add another fucking 10 miles or to add any more miles. Back to the book. Was I pissed off? Not really. Headquarters had been clear that the course was unmarked in many places, which is why I paid close attention to the GPS for the first 72.3 miles. But as soon as I picked up my pacer, I left everything up to them. And whenever I go into a non-thinking mode, I always fail. It happened at Delta Selection and happened again in Moab. SA, situational awareness, is one of my greatest strengths. I take pride in reading terrain, being in tune with myself and dialing in situations. And whenever my SA drops, whatever I've engaged in falls apart like instant karma. Man, just fuck. That's the thing. Every time in my life that I ever should have switched my brain off, try to go on autopilot, anything like that, I just know straight away. Like David said, instant karma. Things just go to shit. Things take a wrong turn. Things just don't go the way they should, and I get jacked up because of it. Back to the book. Too many leaders deflect blame and point fingers instead of calling themselves out. But when they do that, nothing gets fixed in the short or long term. I immediately recognized that I allowed the worst case scenario to happen, and that enabled me to move forward and deal with ramifications that much faster. Once a mistake has been made in the heat of battle, the only thing that matters is dealing with the aftermath. With a clear head, figuring out where, when, and how things went wrong is important. But all evolutions must wait until the race, all evaluations must wait until the race is over. And now I was in 2 races at once, Moab 240 and the race to get to the thyroid medication that awaited me at the next aid station. So David has to take a lot of thyroid medication to keep his thyroid in check, otherwise he gets fucked up. Now he's 10 miles off course and he is really needing a time crunch to get to his thyroid medication. After running a total approximately 15 miles off course, 15 miles, damn. A race official pulled up in a vehicle a couple miles from our wrong turn. They drove us back to the fateful intersection, which is now clearly marked with signage to spare the runners behind me. But we were still 15 miles from the next aid station and out of food and water. And I was in dire need of my meds. Headquarters gave Kish permission to meet us on the course, but by then my condition had deteriorated. My core temperature was plummeting, my lungs were heavy, and I knew that if I continued to run, I would become a medical risk. There was still 135 miles to go in the race, and though I gulped my meds as soon as Kish arrived, my thyroid needed time to reset so my body temperature could normalize. I decided to rest with no idea how long the process might take. I had already run 120 miles, predictably within an hour. My body reacted as if the race was over. I started to swell and tighten up as my muscles shifted into recovery mode. This would be a problem. I've been dealing with my thyroid issue for years. A lot of people in the military, especially those in special operations, get diagnosed with hypothyroidism because of our adrenals are constantly attacked during training and combat. There were 40,000 cases documented between 2008 and 2017, but I've been living on a fight and flight cocktail of hormones ever since I was a young kid. Special ops just finished the job of burning out my adrenal glands. Once the adrenals shut down, the body attempts to get what it needs by tapping the thyroid. The thyroid is the master computer of the endocrine system. And when it's overtaxed, our metabolism, the process converting what we drink and eat into energy, becomes impaired, which can cause a cascade of consequences. Thanks in part to my stretching regime, my adrenals had recovered enough in recent years to stop attacking the thyroid, which allowed it to begin healing. In fact, it turned out that my AFib episode over Christmas, that's when I skipped over that part, but Goggins had an AFib episode with his heart over Christmas, and he had to go to the emergency room to get it regulated again. My AFib episode over Christmas was sparked by heavier than necessary doses of thyroid medication. Since then, my doctors and I have been experimenting with lower dosages. I've been a sickly boy all my life. If my body were only healthy and whole, there would be no telling what I might be able to accomplish. In the end, I was down for 12 hours. While that amount of rest sounds like it could help me later in the race, it is actually quite the opposite. By the time I was back on the trail, my legs felt like they were made out of stone. I was stiff and swollen, and I had fallen from second to something like 8th place, I had fallen from second to something like 80th place, which was more or less dead last. I had every excuse to quit. My luck had soured, my health was compromised, and I'd lost my essay at a crucial time. My race was completely fucked, and I had over half the distance still to go. Some might look at that version of events and think all was lost, but I knew from experience that the best life lessons don't appear when things go well. It's when all your goals and pretty plans turn to shit that you can see flaws and learn more about yourself. Man, I love Goggins' outlook that he has come to embody over these recent years. Back into the book. I had to stay locked in mentally. A lot of people fall down when they get smacked. When they hit the ground, they lose all momentum. Not just physically, but mentally, because they are humiliated. And when you're humiliated, it's impossible to make any sort of progress. We must learn how to absorb life's haymakers without getting knocked down, because picking yourself back off the canvas is the hardest, longest step of all as you fight to regain your momentum. Yes, I had to shut it down for half a day. Yes, all the goals I had for Moab 240 had been obliterated. Yes, my body was a mess, but mentally I was still on my feet and in the race, because I'm not living life for the same reason as almost everyone else. The rewards I seek are internal, and if you have that mindset, you will find opportunities for growth everywhere. During tough times, that growth can be exponential. I wasn't going to win the race or finish in a respectable time, but I had been gifted another rare opportunity to test myself in adverse conditions and become more. If anything, my desire to finish had only grown thanks to the mess I'd made. At the same time, I needed to ease some of the pressure I'd placed on myself. Pressure comes with high expectations, which is great because it can bring out the best, but there are times when it can be more helpful to offload pressure. When you're exhausted, it is vital to remain in control of your thoughts and emotions so you can make decisions with your right mind. Choosing to relieve pressure allows you to do that. When pressure is high, you develop blinders that limit your perception, perspective. That's great for certain situations that demand a hyper-focus. But when you're engaged in something that demands your maximum endurance, it's better to broaden your perspective and your awareness to absorb more of the experience, which enables maximum growth, both during the event and in days and weeks to follow. Besides, if you allow that unrelenting pressure to build, you're liable to snap and make bad situation a whole lot worse. Remember, the goal is always to complete the mission, whatever it may be, with no regrets and clear head, so you can use that progress in life. Cultivating a willingness to succeed despite any and all circumstances is the most important variable It's the most important variable of the apologies, I've lost my spot. It's the most important variable of the re-engagement equation. Your willingness to succeed builds self-esteem. It broadens your concept of your own capability, yet it's the first thing we lose touch with when things go bad. After that, giving up often feels like the sanest option, and maybe it is. But know that quitting chips away at yourself self-worth and allows. But know that quitting chips away at your self-worth and allows and always requires some level of mental rehab. Even if what forces you to quit is an injury or something else beyond your control, you will still have to bounce back from the experience mentally. A successful mission seldom requires any emotional maintenance. In order to execute on your willingness to succeed, you will need to be able to perform without purpose. You've heard of purpose, that magical mission, that magical missing ingredient crucial to landing a fulfilling career and building a happy life. What if I told you the importance of finding your purpose was overblown? What if there never was any such thing as a good friend purpose? What if it doesn't matter what the fuck you do with your time here? What if it's all arbitrary, and life doesn't give flying fuck if you want to be happy? What then? All I know is this. I am David fucking Goggins. I exist, therefore I complete what I start. I take pride in my effort and in my performance in all phases in life. Just because I'm here, if I'm lost, I will find myself. As long as I'm on the planet Earth, I will not half-ass it. Anywhere I lack, I will improve because I exist and I am willing. Damn, that's fantastic. His mentality is just something that I think is fucking phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. That I exist and I am willing. That last line there. I complete what I start. I take pride in my effort and in my performance in all phases of life. Man, that's and the performing without purpose. That's the mentality and the strength of which that I think we should all strive to conquer and achieve within ourselves. It's a thing that we all almost never reach or attain, right? Is that sense of being able to perform without a purpose, the sense to be able to be and accomplish things without a purpose, simply because we are here right now, that we finish what we started, or we do what we say we're going to do. That's, man, that's something worth meditating on for quite a while and embodying for the rest of your life. That's for sure. I knew the race I had planned to run was over, but as for the next moment, next year's race had already begun. My new mission was to sketch out the ultimate blueprint for this course. I released the pressure valve, and my entire team was refreshed and ready to scout details with me. Like future bank robbers, masters of disguise, returning to the branch day after day to absorb the layout, document the rhythms of the staff, come up with an unbeatable plan of attack, we would catalog the first-hand knowledge for the next 135 miles, so in 2020, I would be prepared to blow it the fuck up. Once I started again, I walked for the first 10 minutes. My gait was fucked, so were my lungs. But when I saw my first headlamp, I felt a little spark. After that, I began to add the pressure back. Bit by bit, my pace increased and my competitive edge resurfaced. I managed to pass 24 people before hitting the aid station at mile 140. By the time we got to the RD 46 aid station at mile 167, I was back in the top 10. But it wasn't time for high-fiving because my lung issues were still there. It didn't matter if I was running or walking, standing up or sitting down. I could not get a full breath. I was freezing too, which was a sign that my thyroid may not have had enough time to completely reset. I felt horrible. But I had weathered the thyroid problem and run through the night for the second night in a row. Pain and discomfort were to be expected. This aid station had more food stands, and I ate my fill. As I left a few minutes ahead of my pacer, who was still organizing the gear and wasn't ready to go, I wondered if it had eaten too much, because my chest felt tight as hell. Did I have digestive issues? I couldn't say for sure, so I continued to troubleshoot. I had a fully loaded pack on my back and was heavy enough to make the chest strap extremely tight. Maybe that was what prevented my lungs from fully expanding. I loosened the straps and felt even worse. While I had gone farther than this once before, that was back in 2007, and on a flat 1 mile track. I had never gone this far on this type of terrain and in these conditions, but I had pushed myself to the limit plenty of times and never felt anything like this. Could it be sickle cell crisis? If it was, I never had one this serious. I couldn't pinpoint the problem, but by the time my pacer caught me, I felt something was extremely wrong. I told him everything, and as I listened to myself spill my sad story, I couldn't help thinking about all the bitch-ass whiners I'd come across over the years, who gave every excuse in the world as to why they couldn't finish whatever it was they started. The vast majority of them were simply looking for a way out that allowed them to keep their heads up. Like me, when I quit pararescue, I took mental note of all those motherfuckers, remembered the scenarios they were in, and kept them on lock in my brain. And here I was sounding just like them. Whether it is a 7-mile run or 240-mile run, we all know what it's like to bargain with ourselves to avoid having to do the very thing we said we would. We say we're overworked, overwhelmed, or just over it entirely. I never give in to it because I know that there are a lot of people out there who do not have a choice to make. They cannot run at all and wish like hell they could. At the same time, I knew I wasn't merely uncomfortable. I was fucked up. But running Moab 240 had been my choice. Staying in the race had been my choice. And it was a blessing that I had those choices to make. So, like always, I soldiered on the fuck on. As the trail wound through the farmland and pitched toward the sky into the mountains that had looked painted against the distant horizon all day, I reminded myself why I wanted to be there. It was for the 1 second of glory and the biggest high of all time that strikes and fades like a bolt of lightning, but only if you manage to figure out a way to swim through all the pain, overcome every last obstacle, and cross the finish line. Over the next 13 miles, we gained 3,500 feet of elevation, and my pace slowed dramatically. Part of that was the incline, but there were times where the footing was bad too. In the sections, the trail was covered with slate, shattered cobbles, and boulders. It was unstable as shit, so I took my time, and after 10 miles, I actually started to feel a little better. I didn't feel great, but my condition had improved, and my pacer, who had done due diligence in the past performances to gauge how hard I should push on each section, said we were covering this leg at a fast clip. That gave me hope, as the trail wound into the alpine forest at just under 9,000 feet into the Pole Canyon aid station at dusk, where a volunteer griddled fluffy pancakes and handed them out to all comers. My crew was there waiting on me with a syrupy stack and a race update. I had moved all the way up to 8th place. Man, he's tough motherfucker, eh? If we didn't already know this. But to be able to just crack through that with now his lungs giving him fucking problems, his chest tightening the fuck up. Man, it's some serious shit. That's what I love, is that his ability to not only do these races, which are just fucking hard in themselves, or more than hard in themselves, but his ability to do them with such fucking terrible problems going on around him. So back to the book. Within 5 minutes, I stopped. So he started to run again. Sorry, apologies. He started to run again, and he's not feeling so crash hot after leaving that aid station. Within 5 minutes, I stopped and asked Dan, my pacer for this section, to call Kish and tell the crew to stay at Pole Canyon in case we needed to turn around. But I also wanted to give myself every chance to walk through the fire. Maybe it was the pancakes. Last time, I felt better after a couple of hours, and if I could stay upright on the trail, then it followed that those symptoms might pass again. Incremental progress is still progress, I said to myself. One step is all it takes that is required to take the next one. With that in mind, I told Dan to call Jennifer again and say we were going to press on, and we would let her know if anything changed. We continued to climb into the night toward the highest point in the entire race, at 10,500 feet. The protocol was this: take a few steps, double over, lean heavily on my poles until I could get a few deep breaths necessary to power me forward, for another 3 to 5 steps, and then repeat. I couldn't breathe at all while I was moving. It was all panting and gasping. Whenever I stopped to breathe, I could see Dan waiting for me with a concerned look on his face. "I'm sorry," I gasped. "I'm sorry." I must have said sorry close to 300 times. I don't know why I kept apologizing. Mostly he responded, It's not that far to the top," which is quite comical because I knew we weren't even close. He was trying to spoon feed me some hope, but hope would not get me to the top. Nice try, Dan, I thought to myself. In the 4th hour, about 6 miles into 16.5 mile section, that's right, we were moving at a snail's pace of just over 30 minutes per mile. I finally and abruptly stopped. "This ain't good," I said, gasping. I was proud of myself for trying, but I still wasn't feeling any better. In fact, my lungs had gotten much worse. Dan agreed that we should get off the course and find a medic. He dialed Kish and broke the news, and I watched his face fall at her response. "Hey man," he said after he hung up. I was still bent over the waist begging for oxygen. "I hate to tell you this, but we gotta walk out of here." He explained that there were only 2 options. Option 1 was to descend 6 miles back to Pole Canyon. Option 2 was to keep climbing for 9 more miles toward Trailhead, where my crew could meet us. None of this came as a surprise to me, as we were on a narrow single track. I had been looking for different trails that might offer a possible way out all night, but hadn't seen one. The only trail I saw was the one I was walking on. I knew there was no way a vehicle, an ATV, or anything of the sort could reach me here, in no man's land. I also knew for certain there were no helicopters to fly my sorry ass out of there. The only way out was under my own power. Fuck me. So, if we know David's nobody he's not a guy to give up at, a little stub toe or blisters or anything like that, or a fucked up ankle or knees, but for him to be like, "Oh, come on, hang on a second, this is bad. We've got to know that this is really fucking bad." So he's sort of reflecting on some time back in the SEALs. He's also just slowly dropping off and hiking these last 9 miles to try and get the fuck out of there. He's remembering his time in Hell Week with a gentleman who pushed and pushed and pushed hard in one of the Hell Week rotations with the pool, and actually ended up dying in the pool because he just kept pushing so hard. He died of pulmonary edema, and that's where your lungs fill up with fluid. So David's reflecting on that time, because David's also an EMT. I don't know if people know this, but David's an EMT. He works in the emergency ward in hospitals, and he has done so for a couple of decades. So he's pretty fucking switched on to medical emergencies and things like that. But back to the race. By then, I suspected I had high altitude pulmonary edema, HAPE, a dangerous condition in which the lungs fill with blood and plasma. It's a version of what happened to Scop. It can happen. Scop's the guy that died in the Navy SEALs rotation. He died at the bottom of the pool. It can happen to anybody in high country, even experienced mountaineers at relatively low altitudes. It was at close to 10,000 feet, which is not at all that high. But because I'd already run over 200 miles, I was susceptible to anything and everything. With less than 3 miles to go before I could reach the top of the peak and the next aid station at mile 201, a medic and 2 members of my crew found us on the trail. Unfortunately, there was nothing the medic could do for me. My choices were to either continue walking on the way to the aid station or stop at a trailhead on the way where our vehicle was waiting. I knew that after the next aid station, there was a long descent, and despite how shitty I felt, I did wonder if my body might be able to bounce back, but then I caught myself. I'm often mistaken for a masochist. Some people think I push past pain and take unreasonable risks for sport or spectacle, but that's not true. I push a lot harder than most, but I don't do it to injure myself or impress others. I sure as hell don't want to die. I do it because the body and mind never fail to amaze me. I had no business hiking 16.5 miles in my condition. The last 9 felt damn near impossible because I thought I'd reach my physical limit, but when I looked for it, I found more. Whenever I have been challenged, whenever I've been forced to scrap for additional resources to stay afloat, there has always been more. That's why I ride that line, because those dark moments are rare and raw and beautiful. However, that night, I felt more fucked up than I'd ever been, and I knew that any extra stress on my body might be the breaking point. When we reached the trailhead, I left the course to seek medical treatment, which meant, according to the rules, that I was automatically DNF'd. On the drive to the local hospital, we lost nearly 6,000 feet in altitude, and I began hocking up knots of brown phlegm. In the emergency room, the doctor took a chest x-ray and confirmed that my air sacs were full of fluid. I had HAPE, alright. She checked my vitals and drew blood, gave me small volume nebulized oxygen treatment to open up my lungs, and tested my phlegm to see what kind of infection was present. A few hours later, at around 6 in the morning, the hospital discharged me with an inhaler. That would help me keep my lungs open. When Kish and I got back to the condo we'd rented, the rest of our crew was busy packing, cleaning, and getting ready to travel home. The mood was somber. The race had been tough on everyone. My crew had fought through multiple setbacks and weathered a ton of highs and lows, and while I was proud of running 215 miles with a broken body, and considered those last 16.5 miles a slow march, some of the grittiest I'd ever clocked, taking a DNF is a shitty feeling, and everybody knew it. At least I felt better. By afternoon, I had stopped coughing up phlegm, and my body temperature and energy levels were back to normal, which told me that my thyroid was functioning again. When I had to take DNFs in the past, there was no quick bounce back. I was down for weeks. This situation was new, and it set my mind reeling. There are a lot of people who stay down way too long. They may have been sick as hell, but are on the mend. Yet, when asked how they are feeling, they act like they're no better. In fact, they play it up for pity points. I am not one of those motherfuckers. The second I feel I can get after it, I am going to get the fuck after it. Bottom line, I was struggling with the fact that I was feeling well enough to compete and was in a condo instead of on the trail. A voice in my head woke me up from my fitful slumber at 3 in the morning. It repeated the same savage mantra over and over. You're not done yet, motherfucker. I popped up, bleary-eyed and half asleep. There was nobody else in my room but Kish, and she was dead to the world. I lay back down and closed my eyes, but the voice returned. You are not done yet. I knew what I had to do, but had no clue how Kish would take it. We packed it in. 2 members of my crew had already left, and the other 2 were leaving on flights in a matter of hours. But I would finish the job alone if necessary. I turned and placed my hand on Kish's shoulder. She blinked twice. What time does the finish line close? I asked. Her eyes grew wide as if she were watching a dick grow out of the middle of my forehead. She was disorientated, and so I asked again. What time does the finish line close? Kish knew that what I really wanted to know was if there was enough time left for me to run the last 40 or so miles. The race had started 4 days ago, but runners had 110 hours to complete it. She sat up and grabbed the phone from the nightstand. We have 15 hours, she said. Fucking hell. David, man, even when things, when you get knocked down, where he says, like, most people will play up their injuries, even if they feel a little bit better, they'll play it up and still act like they're pretty well down, they're pretty well knocked out. And he refuses to do that. There's definitely been times in my life where, I've got an injury, I feel sick, I get knocked down, but even if I feel like I'm getting better, I still play it up. I'm definitely guilty of that shit too. Back to the book. Not much left, but Kish pulled into the trailhead parking lot near mile marker 200, where I left the course. I was looking to waste no time in altitude. So, obviously, Goggins is back to the course. He's got one of his pacer friends has stayed with him. Kish is obviously there with him, but he's back on the course. He has DNF'd, so he can't officially finish the course, but he is still going to complete those last 40 miles for himself, because that's what he is, and that's what he believes in. And I think that's something we should all embody. My pacer and I grabbed our gear and headed up the mountain quickly. My team maintained contact for those first 2 miles to make sure I was okay. My legs were stiff as rocks, and I walked with an unsteady gait, but my breath was fine. Still, I felt weak and unconfident. This course had gotten the better of me since mile 72, and part of me thought it was either insane or stupid for trying to finish. Probably both. Kish trailed us on the gravel road ahead, heading up the mountaintop. With going the distance, blasting from the open windows, she pulled up alongside and smiled. The anthem was an old friend. She shared countless of dark times, and I never failed to drown out all my internal chatter and wake up my inner savage. I let that music soak in, found my determination to mark a course that had been kicking my ass for 4 days. "I'm back, motherfuckers," I yelled, picking up my pace. "You thought you had me. You thought you had me down. Only for a second. I'm back." From then on, it was all growth. The next 40 miles were my strongest of the entire race. I hit a level of awareness that allowed me to run free and unpack and examine the previous 200 miles at the same time. With my feet still on the same ground where I'd come up short, eyes on the rocks, trees that played tricks on me, and my mind on where I fucked up, I was able to complete my ultimate blueprint. And the most important thing I learned as I descended toward the red rocks of Moab was that 240 miles is an entirely new realm. And my failure came down to a fundamental flaw in my approach. I'd perfected the 100-mile distance. I knew the gear I needed and how to manage the distance with my mind. But that proved irrelevant. In Moab, 100-milers have aid stations sprinkled every 6 to 10 miles. In Moab, the aid stations were often several hours apart. All but one of dozens of 100-mile races I'd run were on well-marked courses, so there was no need to prioritize navigation. I'd rocked up all this with just another race. I rocked up like all of this was just another race, but it was a whole different arena. And a single error led to a cascade of small mistakes that were magnified by distance into a catastrophe. Next year, Moab 240 would be part race, part military mission. I would imagine the worst case scenario and work backwards from there, so no matter what happened, I would be armed with a plan to remain competitive. I realized that the farther the distance, the more I had to have all the details dialed. There would be no room to take chances with gear or meds. I had to carry it all with me. I couldn't count on bridging great distances between meetups with the crew in a timely fashion. I needed to spot check my paces, update my phone, and have backup comms on hand. Normally, I enjoy being unreachable and off-grid when I'm trail running, but next year I would make the exception, because that's what the course demands. I worked over dozens of small adjustments, and in my mind, as I flew downhill, my lungs were in fine shape, my stride efficient and powerful. And I reminded myself that each and every evolution in life, you never want to be the principal reason for a failed mission. Nobody wants to wake up after a race is over. Nobody wants to wake up after the race is over, wishing they'd been better prepared. If something surprises you in anything that you're trying to accomplish these days, with so much free knowledge at our fingertips, it is because you didn't prepare well enough. And there's no excuse for that. Missions may fail for dozens of reasons, which is fine. Make sure it was something beyond your control, an act of God or Mother Nature, that prevented you from achieving your goal. Then draw up your ultimate blueprint and try again. As I ran from the bike trail onto the Moab city streets, I knew I'd made the cutoff because I knew I'd make the cutoff, but because I DNF'd, I didn't have the right to cross the official finish line. For me, that would have to wait until next year. I found a worthy alternative, a random telephone pole. out of one of several on a busy highway. A traffic zoomed by. I jogged along the shoulder until my total mileage clocked over to 255. That included the official 240 plus the 15 unofficial miles. I didn't raise my arms or pump my fists, and nobody seemed to notice one man finish what he started. But I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. There was no fanfare, but there was glory, and it was all inside. From the outside looking in, my Moab 240 was a disaster. I got lost, nearly froze my ass off, and had multiple medical meltdowns. I went off course twice. It was messy, but I considered it one of my top 5 performances ever, because I never should have completed the distance in that time allowed. But I did. Yes, the scoreboard still read Moab 1, Goggins 0, but I felt Utah was a precious gift. Unlike during 2018, when I was uncertain about so much, I knew exactly where I would be in the 12 months' time. Right back here. It would require a long year of hard training and commitment to studying my blueprint, like a textbook. So be it. This motherfucker of a race had not seen the last or the best of David Goggins. So good. That's fantastic. Man, just being able to finish what you started and having that mentality that he's not doing it for the race, right? Because he DNF'd. He can't finish the race officially. But just having the mentality of finishing what you started, finishing, a job that you have set up for yourself. You've set out these goals, you set out the things that you want to accomplish, and you just go and you do them. The minute I got home from Moab, I went for a run. Training for the next year's race was underway that quickly, and I was fired up. Running had long ago become like breathing to me. It wasn't a hobby. It was damn near a subconscious biological reflex. I had to do it. I didn't necessarily enjoy it, but I could tell on the initial 8-mile shakeout that there was going to be something very different about this training block. I could already feel the fire. Day after day, I could not wait to get the fuck after it, and I trained with reckless abandon. My mind was tracking like never before. That wasn't merely about checking some box. That was straight up redemption. The fitness I gained would also benefit the only other significant event of my 2020 radar, the Windland firefighting season in Montana. But in April 2020, a few short weeks before, I was due to report to work in Misolo. I'm not too sure how to pronounce that place. My left knee swelled up like a water balloon. My knees had troubled me periodically since Navy SEAL training. I wasn't overly concerned at first. I've been going hard and figured it was due to overuse rather than injury. I ignored the tenderness and ran through the pain for days. My body's been compensating for illness and injury for so long that I figured it was only a matter of time before my quadriceps stabilized my knee joint and the pain faded into the background. But it got worse. Reluctantly, I traded in the majority of my road miles for a few daily hours on the elliptical trainer. However, firefighting demands a special variety of real-world fitness to prepare for the infamous 110-pound rucks that awaited me in Montana. So, just to pause there real quick, David is also trying to work as a smoke jumper. It's a firefighter's role in like wilderness firefighting, where you will jump out of an airplane into forest fires to fight them on the ground in remote areas. And so that's something that I think David has already started to work with and is now trying to be a part of the parachute division of that as a smoke jumper. So he's also got that in his mind, as well as the race coming up, and as well as his knees getting dinged up. And I think the idea of his knees being so badly messed up is making him question whether or not he can do the firefighting properly. It was too late to pull out of firefighting. I'd given leadership my word and was determined to back it up. But by the end of the month, my left knee was twice its normal size and throbbed day and night. 3 days before heading north, I opted to get an MRI to understand exactly what the fuck I was dealing with. The Tech who conducted my scan had recognized me, and on my way out of the door, I asked her if she could tell me anything. Techs aren't supposed to discuss what they see with patients or attempt to analyze images, but she shook her head, and her expression suggested I was fucked. Look, she said, you've got a lot going on in that knee. What do you mean by that? I mean, you won't be doing running or those triathlons of yours anytime soon. I wanted to tell her that I'd run 10 miles before coming to see the damn radiology office, but held my tongue because I suspected she was right. I downloaded the results in Idaho motel room, where we stopped to break up the long drive. The official report confirmed multiple tears in the medial and lateral meniscus, a sprained posterior cruciate ligament, general cartilage breakdown, and arthritis. Defects in the lower tip of my femur, a massive Baker cyst behind the knee, and to top it all off, a partially torn ACL. In layman's terms, my knee was 8 ways fucked. The news was deflating. The feeling of an honest day's work is the best feeling I will ever have in my life. And for nearly a year, I'd been looking forward to getting back into the mountains, to the grind with the backcountry fire crew. We'd blocked off 5 months and declined all speaking engagements for that period of time. And now my season looked doomed. As I lay awake that night, Kish reminded me that it still had 2 weeks before day 1 of training, and that we knew an innovative 35-year-old sports physio based in Missoula, I don't know how to pronounce it, where we rented a studio apartment for the summer. Casey specialized in working with world-class athletes and was often on the road with a well-known professional tennis player. In fact, we met him in a tournament in Rome in 2019. But because the coronavirus pandemic had suspended the tour, he is back at home seeing patients and able to work me into his daily schedule. 2 weeks obviously wasn't enough time to fix my knee, but I didn't need to be 100%. If he could help me get even 10% healthier, it might be enough. 2 days later, I limped into Casey's office where 120 milliliters of bloody synovial fluid was pulled out of my knee, enough to fill multiple vials. I was like watching a blow-up toy get reduced to a wrinkled shell after all the air leaked out, and it was obvious that the joint had very little structural integrity left. My range of motion was freakish as fuck. My lower left leg moved like a damn pendulum, nearly 45 degrees either side, while the patella floated like an air hockey puck. For the next 2 weeks, I spent 4 to 5 hours a day with Casey for a regimen of a massage therapy, range of motion work, and treatment called dry needling, which is similar to acupuncture. He stuck me with over 200 of those damn things. I was motherfucking man-sized. I was the motherfucking man-sized pin cushion. We had knee drained twice more for good measure, and while I submitted to every crazy ass interventions he devised, all I could do was hope. I hoped something might work. I hoped Casey might crack the skeletal muscular code to heal my wobbly knee. Yeah, so it's not looking good at all for David right now with his knee, and he did get to go to firefighting, but he actually ended up twisting his, I think it was his knee, or his ankle, because he couldn't support himself properly, and he actually had to go to the emergency room to get that checked out, and he was able to, he honestly just had to stop doing the firefighting, and he was pretty fucked up about that. So it was a big setback. Obviously, he had 5 months blocked off to do the firefighting. Now he can't do it after just a couple of days trying to do it with his fucked up knee, which he ended up fucking up more. So he's back with Casey, and so back to the book. Casey had heard what happened, and he assumed I'd been demoralized. But when he stepped into his office after lunch, I was already there, doing pull-ups, my knee immobilized in an air cast, my crutches leaning against his back wall. I'd had enough time to digest my situation and had only one question for him. Do Do you think I'll be healthy by the second week of October? I asked. Healthy enough for what exactly? Moab 240. He looked baffled, so I explained a bit about the race. He thought it was all a joke and turned to Kish to confirm his suspicions. He's not even remotely kidding, Kish said. Casey could see in my eyes how serious I was, so he grabbed my file, read the summary of both MRIs aloud. It was all there, but just as it was with every diagnosis I had ever received, there was a challenge buried in the bad news. Casey missed that, but I didn't. Let's not have any expectations, he said. I smiled and nodded. Roger that. Having a target allowed me to strategize and prioritize. It wasn't just about healing. Whenever something sets me back, I always set a goal, something tangible to shoot for, that keeps me on task orientated, and prevents me from being consumed by sorrow or whatever is going on. It's important that your goal isn't too readily attainable. I like to set audacious goals during dark times. Too often, motherfuckers are convinced that they are challenging themselves by aiming to accomplish something they've done countless times before. I hear it whenever someone comes to me for training advice, which is a lot. Spoiler alert, it rarely goes the way they'd hope. Recently, someone asked me how to best prepare for a half marathon. I said, "Why the fuck are you running a half marathon?" I asked. "You're already training, so why not a full marathon?" He tripped over his tongue trying to come up with a satisfying answer, but I already knew why. He was training for something he knew he could do. I'm not picking on him. It's just how most of the world operates. Very few individuals step outside the box and attempt to stretch their limits. They rule out the spectacular by default. They put a hard cap on their own performance way before game day. The fact that I put Moab out there would keep me dreaming big enough that the drudgery of rehab had also set up for me the possibility of doing something special. So, skipping a bit forward. During my long days of rehabilitation, I envisioned what the immediate future might bring, starting with the worst case scenario, working forward from there. Locking eyes with the worst case is always my starting point in any endeavor, because it removes fear of failure, prepares me for any and all outcomes, and keeps me leaning net positive from the jump. Whatever happens to us in life, we must aim to keep things net positive. When you have a shitty day, it's tempting to call it an early night and try to forget about it. But if you go to bed in the red, chances are you'll wake up that way too. And all too often, that type of negativity snowballs. When your entire day is fucked up, make sure you achieve something positive before lights out. You'll probably have to stay up a bit later to read, study, get a workout in, or clean the house. Whatever it takes, go to bed in the black. Get it done. That's how you stay net positive on day to day. And when it becomes automatic, it will be so much easier to see any emotional tripwires coming, which will help you strategize around them. That's just such great advice in terms of just staying on task, envisioning a task that's, up in the sky, something crazy, but also in terms of just staying net positive and staying in the black, as he says, and not staying in the red. When things go to shit, try and do something to, get you back to the black. I think that's such incredible advice. Too often, we go, I'm just going to sleep it off. But sleeping off does a little bit, but what actually really cures it is just getting back to the black, is doing something that is going to reset you in a net positive way. I think that's such great advice, something I can really incorporate myself. Back to the book. As always, my ace in the hole throughout this process had been Kish, but her time in Montana had come to an end. So I shifted gears into straight up monk mode. My whole existence revolved around training, visualization, and recovery. Some of the time I spent with Casey, and while it's a fact that he came up with his shit I'd never heard of before, like hitting a Versa climber with pressure cuffs looped around my legs and utilizing high-speed muscle stimulation machine during abdominal and leg workouts, for every hour I spent with him, I put in another 5+ hours on my own. Most people who attempt to recover from an acute injury see their physical therapist a few times a week, for an hour at most. Yet they make the therapist their leader and convince themselves that this is a therapist's job to fix them. We can't rely on others to get us where we need to be. We need more personal ownership and self-leadership. Yeah. So he's going to stay with Casey for a little bit here. Back to the book. Casey helped me a lot, but he wasn't my leader. He was a consultant. I was in charge of my own rehabilitation, and I worked at it up to 10 hours a day, 7 days a week, because I was on the clock. I needed to build strength and rehabilitate in a timely fashion, or Moab would never happen. I tightened up my diet to lose any excess weight and ease the load on my knees. I incorporated heart rate training for the first time in years. I dipped back into cross training. I swam, rowed, and spent hours on the Jacob's ladder and the assault bike. I was open to any exercise with a high suck factor, and that I could maintain for long periods of time, while sparing my knees. My sleep was the best it had ever been, and with every workout and each passing day, the dog got hungrier and hungrier. Operation Moab Redemption was on track. Of course, whenever David Goggins feels like he's got it all, instant karma bites back. I endured bouts of intimate swelling and continued to have my knee drained. In fact, 5 days before the race, we drained a baseball-sized Baker cyst behind my knee because it was inhibiting my newfound range of motion. Yeah, I still had issues, but I certified my knee as good enough. And on October 7, I towed the line. That was a major accomplishment. As far as I was concerned, I was already back in the black, and whatever happened from here would be gravy, which freed me up to run my natural ass off. Man, fucking hell. So he's done the work there. He's prepped himself. He's brought himself back up to speed from his injuries, from just every fucking thing that's happening with his knee right now, or knees. Like both his knees are jacked, but one of them in particular. But so he's gotten to the race. He's at Moab. I'm going to skip a little bit here, but he's gotten to Moab. He's at the 240 mile, the redemption Moab rate, right? And so he is, he's actually gotten into it. He's doing well. He's at around mile 70. He started to feel some pain in his tendon in his left ankle. And around mile 130, he ran out of water during the hottest part, 90-degree day. He became dehydrated, and his left ankle just started to become something he just could not ignore anymore. And so back to the book. We called ahead, and Kish was able to have water, pickle juice, and electrolytes ready when we arrived at aid station. At around 2 p.m, I was comfortably in second place, about an hour behind the leader. The only shelter was our support vehicle. I sat shotgun while I hydrated. Kish placed ice packs under my arm and back of my neck, and I placed one on my groin area. All the trigger points that bring the core temperature down quickly. The rest of my crew left us alone. I got so cold so fast, pretty soon I was jackhammering, and this time I surrendered to it. Kish sensed my concern. "Something's bothering you," she said, "but I can't help you if you don't tell me what it is." I nodded and took off my left shoe. My anterior tibial tendon, which sits above the ankle joint, was swollen as thick as a rope. Any movement at all felt as if I was piercing my foot with a red-hot blade. The pain was so palpable that even Kish was clenching her teeth when she picked up the phone to call Casey. I had asked Casey to join the crew because it was obvious that the old blood and guts routine I'd relied on for so long wouldn't be enough this time. My 45-year-old body was breaking down, and I had a feeling I'd never have have his expertise. I'd need his expertise somewhere along the way. Trouble was, he was resting back at the crew cabin in Moab and couldn't get to us for an hour and a half. That was on me. I should have made sure he was at every aid station, especially this deep in the race. But it wasn't in the blueprint. I'd been awake for about 36 hours straight by then, and all I could do was close my eyes and try to get some sleep while waiting for his arrival. But between the heat, my ankle pain, and the racing heartbeat, stress from the running clock, I couldn't relax. I kept picturing the race leader scampering ahead like a jackrabbit while I was stuck. Thanks for all the rehab, bro. I now have a new stride, and my ankle is fucked, I said with a weary smile. Casey had arrived and was inspecting my foot and ankle from every angle. The joint was particularly dislocated, and my tendon was puffy as hell. Partially dislocated, I mean. As if it weren't getting ready to pop through the taut skin. Tell me you can unfuck it. He set my foot down gently and nodded. His hands on his hips, he had his look in his eye and reminded me of the medics that hang around Hell Week. Those guys are special breed. They witnessed a lot of suffering, but are programmed never to show sympathy or tell you to quit. Your bone could be coming out of your skin, and they will blow on it, tape the shit up, and say you're good to go. Casey's demeanour was just like theirs, which convinced me that he'd figure something out to keep me moving, but it would be evil, and I would have to suck it the fuck up. This tendon wants to rupture, he said. That startled me. Kish too. It's okay. I can prevent the rupture and stabilize it, enough that you can continue to run, but it's going to hurt like hell. For the next hour, he scraped my puffy tendon with a blunt metal instrument while I lay back in this portable treatment table wearing blinders. The only way I could describe the pain is it was so bad I could only laugh or cry. And motherfucker, I chose laughter. Used to be that only people stupid enough to think of running 240 miles was a good time were white people, I said while Casey dug into my tendon, trying to move the fluid enough to slide my joint back into place. Then my black ass showed up. You all realize I'm choosing to do this, right? This is my motherfucking choice. Not only that, I'm paying for it. I paid for this motherfucker right here to fly to fucking Utah, torture my ass with a blunt instrument in the middle of nowhere. The harder Casey scraped my tendon, the louder my howls of laughter became. We were talking out of control, breathless belly laughs. Pretty soon the whole crew was dying. When I first limped to Casey's table, I'd been pissed off, and the crew looked somber as fuck. And they'd all been excited when I was running with the leader for the majority of the race, first 90 miles. They watched me perform and helped me strategize to maintain the iron grip on second place, while I waited for the back half to make my move, only to witness yet another fucking setback. Something always breaks down for me. That's no secret, but it's frustrating to tell to find yourself in the same position over and over. The crew felt bad, and I didn't need or want their sympathy. I couldn't use it. Sympathy has no power. Humor, on the other hand, picks everyone up. It's a huge morale boost. Laughing at yourself and the absurdity of life and your own goofy choices gets the endorphins flowing and adrenal pumping. It helped me take the pain and distracted the crew from the fact that the rest of the race would almost certainly devolve into the walk fest. They all thought so because it was obvious that my ankle was seriously injured, and they knew from the tone of my voice and the laughter that I was about to quit. That I wasn't about to quit. A person who refuses to quit has a lot of tools at their disposal, and I didn't use humor merely as a numbing agent or a tool of strategic distraction. I used it to lock in even deeper. The more Casey worked on me, the louder my team laughed. The clearer I could see the race wasn't close to being over. Keep laughing, motherfuckers, I thought to myself. Wait until you see me in the back half of this bitch. Turned out that all the laughter had reawakened the sleeping savage within. More than 3 hours after I arrived in the aid station, my ankle was back in the joint and wrapped in 6 types of athletic tape to prevent it from flexing it. It was almost like a cast, but Casey showed me that despite how it felt, it could take some pounding. This joint needs to move, he said. It's going to hurt, but moving on it is the best thing for it. In other words, Merry fucking Christmas. Man, some great photos in here of David laying on the portable medical table with Casey working on him, on his hips and on his ankle. Jesus Christ. So, skipping over a little bit here, David's got, he's up and at it. He's running with Kish, his wife, as the pacer, and they're running the same stretch they ran last year together. But this time it's a little bit different. David's actually having fun with it, and he's actually running real hard. And he's running so hard, in fact, that this was Kish's favorite part of the course. And he's running so hard, in fact, that she's just thinking to herself, or talking with David, she's wondering if this was as hard last year because she doesn't remember being this hard. And so they're having a lot of fun with it, and David's feeling a lot better on that side of things. And so he's running real hard this time round. So back to the book. I'm afraid of a lot, but I've learned to flip the fear by facing whatever it is I'm scared of head on. When I first started to face my fears, I was tentative as fuck. That's normal, and the emotions and discomfort I felt were proof of how potent this process can be. My anxiety stirred and my adrenal pumped as my mind edged closer to what I was so desperate to avoid. But within all that energy is a mental and emotional growth factor that can lead to self-empowerment. Just as stem cells produce growth factor that stimulates cellular communication, muscle growth, and wound healing in the body, the fear is a seed pod packed with growth factor for the mind. When you deliberately, consistently confront your fear of heights, or particular people, places, and situations that unsettle you, those seeds germinate and your confidence grows exponentially. You might still hate jumping off high things or swimming beyond the waves, but your willingness to keep doing it will help you make your pace with it. You may even be inspired to try and master it. That's how a kid who was afraid of the water his whole life became a Navy SEAL. Some people take the opposite path and hide from their fears. They are like villagers terrorized by rumors of a dragon to the point that they cannot leave their own property. They cower, and that dragon, who they had never seen themselves, only gains strength and stature in their minds, because when they hide from whatever it is that freaks you out, that growth factor works against you. It will be your fear that grows exponentially, while the possibilities become ever more limited. I had 40 miles of steady altitude gain in front of me. That is a lot of time to complete last year's breakdown, and quick cuts of me doubled over, begging for breath flash in my head, but each step up onto another hump of the dragon's spine confirmed my commitment to the task on hand. Until I became the knight who turned up at the village one quiet evening, sharpened my sword, and slayed that motherfucking dragon. In 2020, the thin air did not trouble me. My lungs were clear, and I ran so well that my paces had trouble checking me. But it all came at a cost. A vicious rash had erupted on my ass. The entire left foot was one giant blister, and after lasting for damn near 60 miles, the careful tape job that supported my ankle was unraveling, along with my focus. I was in so much pain, it was difficult to walk, much less run, and impossible to think. Goggins the Savage had fled the scene, and it was David who topped out at mile 201 and hobbled into the aid station. That rash stung so bad I crab walked the porta potty without a word. Kish trailed with me, clean set of clothes, and industrialized sized tub of Dedicin diaper cream. When she yanked my drawers down, she gasped at ugly scope of work. My ass had turned to hamburger meat. It was seeping and my tank was torn apart. But Kish got tied up in there. Kish got right up in there and smeared that zinc-based cream wherever it had to go until her hands were covered in my blood. That's true love, motherfuckers. Each time she touched that rash, electric shock of agony zipped up my spine and snapped my jaw shut. For an encore, Casey glanced and taped the blisters on my ankle. That didn't feel too good either, but I was too damn tired for another comedy show. The entire process took an hour, which was too long, but I didn't mind at the time because I was too deep in the hurt locker to consider anything but survival. The pain was bordering on biblical as my pacer, Mike, and I started out again and scraped along at a zombie's pace. My ass felt like it was being sliced and filleted with rusty razor blades each step. My blisters burned, and it seemed like it was a matter of time before that tendon on my ankle snapped like rubber. 6 miles in, we came across a campsite toilet set up by a lake. I lied and told Mike I had to hit the head. In reality, I was desperate to get off my feet. With 33 miles left, I'd hit my breaking point, and all I wanted was for the race to be over. Pain had never stopped me in an ultra race before, yet there was a state of ducking and hiding in the shitter, quaking in my running shoes. That's when Goggins appeared and found me in there. Goggins knew that the only way to deal with my pain is to run straight through that motherfucker. So he knifed David, stuffed him down the toilet, and took the fuck over. From the point on, I performed at a level I didn't think was still possible for me. I used Mike as fuel and raced against him like he was my competitor. I dropped him on the descent, long boring downhill terrain is his only weakness as a runner, and my strength, anything, and is my strength. Anything long and boring is my strength. I put several minutes on him. Mike is a very successful guy. He works in finance in New York City. He's an accomplished ultra runner. He's not used to being dropped, let alone by someone 200 miles into a race. It pissed him the fuck off. I slowed down and let him catch up. When he did, he called Kish to tell her we were running well ahead of schedule, which shocked her because she was at the crew cabin doing laundry and didn't expect to have to be back on course for several hours. Then he called his wife, who's also an elite runner, and fumed about how I dropped him. He wanted me to hear how he felt, and when he hung up, he started barking at me too. He took my behavior as a fuck you, but it was my respect for Mike that encouraged me to try and drop him. I knew how great a runner and competitor he is. I wanted to strike a nerve. I was picking a fight with a guy who loves a good fight, and because I knew I would bring in more out of us both, which is what I needed. Just as I hoped, took it as a personal challenge, I inflicted pain and humiliation on him, and made him surely enough to serve some right back at me. At the point, Moab 240 disappeared and became a 17-mile race between two alphas who were throwing down. We went from running and walking to hammering, and it hurt both of us. By that point, I covered 220 miles, and he'd run 80, and we still clocked sub 8 and in sub 7-minute miles. Attitudes were everywhere. Somewhere in there, we decided to be friends again, and he looked over at me, mystified. "I'd never seen this before," he said. "You're a freak. You can lift heavy and run like this? Your ankle and knee are all fucked up, and you're 200 miles into the race, and you drop me?" I get that kind of thing a lot from friends and strangers. They read about me taking on incredible challenges and frequently performing at a high level, or witness it themselves, and they think I was born for it, and I have some innate quality that they lack. Even after Can't Hurt Me, his first book, many people still feel that way, when in fact the opposite is true. I was born with birth defects, very few prospects, and raised in hell. But I found my way. Mike knew my whole story, but he experienced something he'd never seen before. He watched me defy my broken body, and not just refuse to quit, but somehow out in the way that defied logic. "I'm not I'm I said. "I'm just a guy who believes in himself more than most. I'm aware that what we are capable of, and that I got there, I'm aware of what..." Apologies. Lost my spot. "I'm not a freak," I said. "I'm just a guy who believes in himself more than most. I'm aware of what we all are capable of, and that to get there, I have to harness every bit of power and energy I can. Power that is within all of us and all around us. I use your weakness as strength. I use your aggravation as strength. I ignite my competitive spirit and yours to get me moving even faster. Because I can drop a hard motherfucker like you this deep into a race. What the fuck does that say about me?" Skipping a little bit here. The final section of Moab 2020 was the best I'd ever felt on the road or trail. The fastest I'd ever moved so deep in a race. And when the first city lights twinkled below us, I knew that redemption was mine at last. I crossed the line in a state of euphoria. That wasn't a brand of bliss you may be familiar with. It was Goggins' version. Nasty, electric, and practically spoke in tongues, as I talked all kinds of shit to myself, to my demons, to the mountains, to the dark night sky, and to my North Star. "You don't know me, son," I howled. "You don't know me." The sparse crowd cheered, and my team laughed when I hit the dirt and knocked out 25 push-ups because I still could. I'd been in second place most of the race. When I left the mile 148 station, I was 4 hours behind the race leader. But I ran out the fastest back halves of Moab 2040 ever and finished in 62 hours, 21 minutes, 29 seconds. Just 90 minutes behind the winner. The savage was now in full bloom, and he had an unquenchable thirst. So that's where I'm going to leave the book. There's a lot more left and a lot more stories left to read. I just want to finish on this last quote that he had, which I think is important for us all to know. "I never needed to be the hardest motherfucker in the world. That became a goal because I knew it would bring out my best self, which is what this fucked up world needs from all of us, to evolve into the very best version of ourselves. That's a moving target, and it isn't a one-time task. It's a lifelong quest for more knowledge, more courage, more humility, and more belief. Because when you summon the strength and discipline to live like that, the only thing limiting your horizon is you. That was Never Finished by David Goggins. David Goggins' second book. Man, there's so much in that back last bit of the book there, where the redemption arc of Moab 240, and then he goes into more sections after the race about him trying out for pararescue. Not for pararescue, sorry, for the smoke jumper stuff, where they parachute into the smoke and how he does that, as well as a couple of pretty risque surgeries that happen and some other things that happen in that half too, which are very, very interesting too. But I want to leave a lot in that book for you to explore yourselves, and read and discover yourselves, and just internalize and learn from yourselves as well, because I think they're so important. It's been really nice sitting here reading with you guys. I know it's been a very long podcast, Jocko level length, but this was my first book reading, first book deep dive. Obviously we can see the sun start to set behind me, so you know how long I've been here reading to you. I maybe going forward, maybe I'll mark out fewer sections but more important sections. Maybe I mark out shorter sections, but you let me know what you think. If you did manage to make it to the end of this podcast, you're a fucking legend, and I am so incredibly thankful and appreciative of your time and your willingness to hear me through, even through me stumbling reading. Again, this is my first time doing a book breakdown, and it's the podcast episode 3 of the Zach Hampson podcast. Man, there's so much to reflect in there, especially with just Goggins' attitude for never being finished, for always running the race, always finishing what you start, taking pride in what you do, overcoming adversity by throwing yourself headlong in adversity, with the recordings he would do of hateful comments of his story, playing that back on repeat until it just becomes a story and it's no longer powerful, but now you have the power back in your own hands. Just everything. Great book. I love it. I am a very avid reader. I have another book lined up, and it was kind of mentioned in this book, but it's going to be Cameron Hanes, Endure. So Cameron Hanes is the guy that is a good friend of David, and David actually considers Cameron Hanes as the only person on earth that is similar to him. And I've been a big fan of Cameron for a long time. But let's get ahead of ourselves. That's the next book coming up, but we're going to have a guest in between that, which is going to be very exciting. So yeah, I guess this podcast is kind of sponsored by myself, Hampson Consultants, with the ultimate sales team in a box. If you have a business that needs a sales team and you don't want to go through the stresses of hiring an internal sales team, you can hire us and we can be the sales team for you, big or small. But yeah, thank you so much for watching, guys. Really appreciate your time, and I hope that you were able to get a lot out of that, as I did as well. Matter of fact, after I finished the book, I actually fucking bought a 90-kilo sandbag to just haul around on the beach, and I have plans to just put that motherfucker on my shoulders and start doing some trails. And I'll probably make some videos out of that, so that'll be interesting as well. So I'm going to sit back, enjoy this sunset, and I hope you guys have a fantastic day. Thank you.